Before we begin this quiet journey into the past, let me ask you something. Where are you watching or listening from right now? Is it daytime, or are you winding down late at night? Maybe you're lying in bed, your phone propped on a pillow, or perhaps you're out for a walk, headphones in, letting history fill the corners of your mind. Wherever you are, take a breath, get comfortable, and let this story wrap around you like an old, heavy cloak. If you're new here, welcome to Calm History for Sleepwear. We turn so-called boring history into the most fascinating parts of your evening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you enjoy the ride, and share this with someone who loves the strange and forgotten corners of human life. Because tonight, we're not just telling you about kings, queens, or knights. We're telling you why medieval weddings, those grand romantic spectacles we imagine, were often more dangerous than going into battle. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But history is rarely what it seems on the surface. Now close your eyes, if you like, or let your gaze drift while we begin the first thread of this long and tangled tapestry. Let's set the scene. It's the year 1327, and somewhere in a cold stone manor house in northern England, a marriage is being prepared not for love, but for alliance. Eleanor of Northmere, just 13 years old, sits on a carved wooden stool while her older cousin braids ribbons into her long dark hair. Her father is pacing in the hall, a worried look on his face. The wedding is not just a fragile political arrangement between two rival landowning families, who have spent the last 20 years squabbling over a strip of forest that no one even really wants anymore. Today's wedding will seal the truce or destroy it. Outside, men are sharpening swords, not because there's a battle planned, but because medieval weddings often ended in bloodshed, not dancing. The average knight had a 1 in 5 chance of getting injured at a wedding feast, not during war. But during these so-called celebrations, there's even a Latin phrase for it in the 14th century. Nox nuptialis ad, the dangerous wedding. Night, why? Because weddings back then were not soft affairs with white dresses and gentle vows. They were powder kegs of tension, drunkenness, rival families, and public humiliation. Imagine inviting everyone you hate, putting swords on their belts, feeding them barrels of wine, and locking them in the same hall for 3 days straight. That's what a medieval wedding often was, in Eleanor's world. Marriage is about property, transfer, legal contracts, and political traps. The church has declared that marriage is sacred, but most nobles don't marry for love. They marry for land, for alliances, and sometimes for revenge. There are no wedding planners, no pastel-colored cakes, no DJs playing soft music. Instead, there's a terrifying document called a dower charter, where a woman's body and future pregnancies are listed in cold legal terms. Her virginity is not a personal matter, it's a financial clause. If the bride isn't intact, the marriage can be annulled, and the bride's family can be ruined. So the stakes are high. And here's where the danger begins. The wedding night ritual is not private. In many medieval courts, the couple is watched, sometimes literally, by family members, priests, or legal witnesses who want to be sure the marriage has been consummated. Sometimes they even collect the sheets as evidence. This public scrutiny turns intimacy into political theater, and it creates fertile ground for violence. If the groom is too drunk, too nervous, or if he's mocked by his enemies during the feast, tempers flare. Humiliation leads to duels. Family members get stabbed. And that's before we even get to the food poisoning. Feasts in the medieval world are biohazards. The kitchens of great halls are dark, smoky places where cooks stir massive cauldrons of stew for hundreds of guests. Meat hangs unrefrigerated for days. Bread is filled with weevils. Spices are expensive, but when used, they often mask the taste of rot. Drinking water is unsafe, so guests drink wine, beer, or mead all day and all night. By the time the wedding feast reaches its third course, many of the men are staggering, their swords clinking dangerously at their sides. Insults flow freely. Someone starts boasting about a hunting trip. Another man interrupts, claiming he once killed a boar twice the size. The argument escalates, and soon a dagger is drawn not in a battlefield, but at the wedding table. In 1342, in southern France, an entire wedding party was killed because a drunken knight insulted the bride's father over the quality of the venison. And then there's the issue of fire. Most medieval wedding feasts are held indoors, in massive wooden halls draped with tapestries. The halls are lit with hundreds of candles, open flames flickering dangerously close to cloth and fur. In 1375, during the wedding of Lord de Vere's daughter, a curtain caught fire during the dancing, killing 23 people trapped in the smoke. Guests in heavy wool cloaks and metal armor couldn't move fast enough to escape. But perhaps the darkest part of medieval weddings is the abduction custom, a practice that's halfway between tradition and crime. In some regions of Europe, if a nobleman wanted to marry a woman and her family refused, he could simply kidnap her and force a wedding, often with the church's reluctant blessing. This wasn't seen as scandalous, it was a recognized form of courtship. Sometimes the bride's own family staged a fake abduction to avoid paying dowry. But fake or not, these abductions were dangerous, traumatic, and often violent. Imagine a wedding where the bride arrives, bound in ropes, flanked by armed men. Her future decided by power plays instead of choice. As for the common people, the peasants, their weddings were simpler but no safer. In the countryside, weddings became occasions for local brawls, with entire villages turning out to drink, dance, and sometimes settle old grudges. In 1389, in a small English village near Norwich, a wedding feast turned into a riot when a guest accused the bride's brother of cheating at dice. By dawn, 5 people were dead, including the priest. So why did people go through with these weddings if they were so dangerous? The answer lies in medieval honor culture. Refusing to attend a wedding was an insult. Not bringing a generous gift could lead to a feud. Even if you knew the wedding would be tense, violent, or chaotic, you had to go or risk offending the wrong person. And once you were there, you had to participate in the rituals, no matter how bizarre. Take the bedding ceremony. For example, after the feast, the newlyweds are led to the marriage bed by a crowd of noisy, joking guests. Sometimes guests throw shoes at the couple for good luck. Other times they sing crude songs or pretend to give advice on how to consummate the marriage. In some cases, guests actually stay in the room, watching from the corners, until the first part of the bedding is complete. The pressure is enormous. For young couples, especially teenagers forced into arranged marriages, this ritual could be terrifying, humiliating, and dangerous. There are records of brides fainting, grooms collapsing, and nervous breakdowns occurring during these ceremonies. And if anything went wrong, if the couple failed to consummate the marriage, the entire alliance between families could fall apart. Wars have started over less. So tonight, as you listen to this story, imagine the flickering torches, the echo of boots on stone floors, the sharp smell of sweat, wine, and old wood. Imagine being a guest at a medieval wedding, knowing that at any moment a toast could turn into a duel, a joke could trigger a brawl, and a simple slip of etiquette could lead to death. This is not just about history, it's about human nature under pressure. And this is just the beginning. Stay with me as we continue this journey through the dangerous, fascinating world of medieval weddings. The night deepens, and the cold stone walls of the manor hall seem to trap the echoes of laughter and the sharp clang of tankards meeting in forced celebration. Eleanor of Berwick, the child bride, is now seated quietly near the hearth, her cheeks flushed not from wine but from terror wrapped in silk. Her groom, a lanky boy of 15 named Godfrey of Northmere, has barely spoken to her all evening. He's too busy trying to survive the social minefield of the feast, aware that any wrong glance or poorly timed comment could lead to disaster. Around them, the guests are performing the ritualistic chaos of a medieval wedding, eating, drinking, gambling, boasting, and testing the limits of politeness. The tapestry sways slightly in the draught as candles flicker dangerously close to their fringes. Servants rush to refill cups, carrying wooden trenchers piled with greasy mutton, stews of questionable freshness, and hard dry bread known as trencher loaves, used first as plates, later as food. But beneath this loud, drunken surface, a darker current swirls. For every wedding guest in this medieval hall, there are old resentments smoldering like coals under wet ash. These gatherings are not just about union, they are about status games. Old insults remembered, debts unpaid, and grudges disguised as toasts. One wrong move, one careless jest, and violence can erupt like a pot boiling over. The local blacksmith, invited only because he once shod the Lord's horse, sits tensely in the corner, eyes darting between the drunk knights and the rowdy squires. He knows that in weddings like this, peasants often get caught in the crossfire when noble tempers explode. His wife, sitting beside him, grips his hand tightly beneath the table. Meanwhile, in the manor kitchen, the cooks are panicking. The venison for the third course has gone rancid, but there's no time to replace it. They douse it in cloves and cinnamon, praying the guests are too drunk to notice. But medieval kitchens are breeding grounds for disaster. Huge iron cauldrons hang over open fires. Slippery floors coated in grease make accidents inevitable. In some castles, it was said that the most dangerous room wasn't the armory, it was the kitchen. Scalding burns, slips, and fires could kill more people in a day than a battlefield did in a week. And when a feast serves hundreds of guests, food poisoning is almost guaranteed. There's no concept of bacteria or hygiene, no refrigeration. Meat is salted, dried, or smoked, but even that isn't always enough. Outbreaks of stomach cramps, vomiting, and worse are common after these weddings. Imagine waking up the next morning, groaning not from drink but from medieval salmonella, while your hosts insist you stay another day for the after feast. Back in the hall, the entertainment begins to spiral. A traveling jongler juggles, knives dangerously close to the guests' faces, his eyes wild with nervous energy. Musicians play the rebec and the hurdy-gurdy, but the tempo gets faster as the night stretches on. Guests bang their fists on the long wooden tables, demanding more spectacle. Someone starts a mock duel, clanging swords together in jest, but the line between play and real violence is thin. The young knight leading the game, Sir Baldwin of Locksley, has been simmering with jealousy all evening. He wanted to marry Eleanor himself, but her father chose Godfrey instead, and now Baldwin's pride is a wound rubbed raw by wine. With a grin that's more of a snarl, he challenges Godfrey to a friendly contest of in front of the whole hall. Godfrey, barely out of boyhood, knows he cannot refuse. To decline would be to admit cowardice, and in the medieval code of honor, cowardice is death by another name. The wrestling match begins, and at first the crowd cheers, but then it turns ugly. Baldwin twists Godfrey's arm too hard. Godfrey yelps in pain, but the laughter of the crowd drowns him out. Someone throws a cup. Another guest shouts, "Break his neck and be done with it." The line between ritual sport and lethal intent vanishes. It takes 3 older knights to pull Baldwin off the groom, who stumbles away, humiliated. His new marriage has barely begun, and already he is marked as weak. For a medieval nobleman, this is social doom. His father-in-law watches silently from The high table, eyes narrowing, calculating whether this boy is worth the alliance after all. The seed of future betrayal is planted in that moment not by swords on a battlefield, but by wrestling at a wedding feast. Elsewhere in Europe, similar scenes play out. In Italy, there is the infamous case of the Barberini wedding of 1402, where a family feud turned the wedding into a literal siege. The bride's uncle refused the seat of honor, locked the gates of the palazzo, and unleashed crossbowmen from the balconies. Death. In Scotland, the Black Dinner of 1440 began as a wedding feast, but ended with the execution of two teenage guests in front of the bride and groom. The medieval world treated weddings like a public stage, and sometimes the performance ended in death. Let's not forget the role of superstition. Medieval people lived in terror of curses, omens, and the evil eye, and weddings were ripe for both blessings and bad luck. A sneeze from the bride could be seen as a sign of future infertility. A spider crawling across the altar cloth might be interpreted as a warning of betrayal. In some villages, witches were blamed if a wedding feast soured or if a groom collapsed from too much wine. In 1351, a baker's daughter named Marjorie Cobb was burned at the stake after being accused of cursing the bread served at a noble wedding, simply because she had refused to attend the ceremony. Fear of witchcraft intertwined with wedding customs, creating an atmosphere of paranoia. And then there were the body rituals, designed to test the couple's endurance and ensure fertility. Some of these practices sound unbelievable today, but were standard in parts of medieval Europe. In certain regions, after the bedding ceremony, guests would bang pots and pans outside the marriage chamber, a custom called chivarat, to mock the couple and scare away evil spirits. But in reality, the noise often provoked real arguments. Inside the room, where exhausted, terrified teenagers tried to perform their expected roles under enormous pressure. In other cases, the local priest might bless the marriage bed with holy water, but only after examining it for suitable conditions. This wasn't about comfort, it was about proving virginity, ensuring heirs, and protecting dynasties. Failure could mean annulment, and annulment meant scandal. Sometimes, the bride's body was literally inspected by midwives before the wedding night to confirm her virginity. Gif. They reported anything suspicious, Oscar. A hymen that didn't meet expectations, the marriage might be cancelled on the spot. The consequences were severe. A girl labeled impure could be sent to a convent, disowned or worse, accused of being a seductress or sorceress. And yet, medieval medical knowledge was so poor that many of these so-called examinations were little more than superstitious rituals performed by frightened or ambitious women serving the court. The human cost was enormous, as the wedding feast drags into its second day. Sleep is not an option. Guests are expected to stay, to drink more, to dance until their legs give out. In the cold morning hours, some wander into the chapel to pray, while others fall asleep in corners, snoring beside empty cups. But even then, danger lurks. A sudden boar hunt might be organized to entertain the nobles, sending half-drunk knights, into the forest with sharp lances and poor coordination. Accidents happen. People die. Yet it's all part of the tradition. Weddings were not about comfort or love. They were about proving strength, forging alliances, and sometimes testing fate itself. And so, as you listen to this story in the stillness of your room, consider the weight of those medieval nights. Think of the flickering torchlight, the hot breath of horses outside the manor gates, the metallic clatter of goblets on oak tables, and the trembling hands of a young bride adjusting her veil while her father negotiates her future over roast, swam, and spiced wine. Weddings, for us, may be symbols of joy, but in the medieval world, they were often the most dangerous days of a person's life, not just for the couple, but for everyone involved. And this is only the second chapter in our long, quiet journey through this hidden history. Stay with me, because there's much more to uncover. As the second day of feasting bleeds into the third, the boundaries of time blur inside the manor hall. There are no clocks in medieval England. Only the sun's sluggish crawl across the sky and the uneven toll of church bells far in the distance. Guests no longer know whether it's morning or night. They only know their stomachs are bloated, their heads are foggy, and their tempers are dangerously thin. This is the point in a medieval wedding when things often tip from reckless joy to quiet disaster. The servants, exhausted and stumbling, refill goblets with sour ale and thin wine that has gone cloudy from poor storage. Children run barefoot between tables, weaving through puddles of spilled mead and discarded bones, their shrieks adding to the relentless noise. Somewhere near the dais, a minstrel has fallen asleep mid-song, his lute resting on his chest like a forgotten relic. Eleanor, the child bride, has retreated to the edge of the hall, her face pale beneath her coronet of wildflowers. Her new husband, Godfrey, is slumped in conversation with a pair of older knights who are gleefully recounting their most gruesome battlefield injuries, as if comparing scars at a wedding is a sacred rite of passage. Cinematic. But underneath this heavy atmosphere, another layer of tension thickens. The danger of broken promises. In the medieval world, marriage contracts are as perilous as swords. Every noble marriage is a legal minefield, filled with clauses about land inheritance, feudal loyalty, and bloodline purity. If one family believes they've been cheated, if, for example, the bride's dowry is smaller than promised, or if the groom's family suddenly refuses to honor a land agreement, is not just possible, it's expected. Feasts like these are breeding grounds for backroom betrayals and whispered threats. And in a world where handwritten contracts are rare and illiteracy is rampant, the spoken word becomes dangerously binding. A drunken boast made at the table can be interpreted as a legal promise. A careless joke about a rival's land might be remembered as an insult worthy of war. Words have sharp edges here, sharper than steel, and everyone knows it. Outside the manor, the weather turns foul. A cold rain begins to fall, soaking the cloaks of guards posted near the gates. Their armor rusts as they stand motionless, watching for threats not from outside but from within. It is common during medieval weddings for assassins to slip into the festivities disguised as guests. In 1295, the Duke of Montfort was murdered during his daughter's wedding by a man pretending to be a merchant delivering spices. Poison is a favorite weapon at such events because it allows the killer to act under cover of ritual. A pinch of powdered arsenic in a goblet of wine, or a sprinkle of nightshade in a stew. And the rival lord can vanish from the political board without a single sword being drawn. The kitchens are always vulnerable. No one watches the spice jars closely enough. Every cook has debts. Every servant knows secrets. It is said that in medieval Europe, more lords were killed at wedding feasts than on battlefields, a chilling testament to the politics of trust. The poisoners often escape punishment because medieval forensic knowledge is nearly non-existent. A sudden death is blamed on bad meat or the humors of the body. Only rarely does anyone suspect foul play unless, of course, the dead man is politically inconvenient. Back in the hall, another ritual unfolds. The presentation of the bride's gifts. Eleanor is led forward, her silk slippers slipping slightly on the damp floor. Her new husband presents her with symbolic tokens, perhaps a ring, a belt, or a carved comb. In return, her family presents him with land deeds, livestock tallies, and coin. But there is no romance in this exchange. Every smile is forced, every gesture weighed. The entire event is a transfer of wealth disguised as ceremony. A merger between two fragile estates bound together by mutual suspicion. And yet, failure to perform this ritual properly could lead to disaster. If the bride refuses to smile, or if the groom drops the ring, the guests might whisper about bad omens. In 1314, a wedding in Normandy ended in massacre because the bride accidentally dropped her veil, and her groom's uncle took it as a sign of future betrayal. That single moment of clumsiness escalated into swords drawn in the hall, and by the time the fighting stopped, 14 men were dead and the marriage annulled. As the third course of food is served, the mood deteriorates further. Game of dice begins at the back of the hall, where bored squires wager their wages and tempers rise quickly. Gambling is a fixture of medieval feasts, but it often leads to bloodshed. Cheating is rampant, but no one wants to be accused of it publicly. To accuse a knight of cheating at dice is to challenge his honor, and in medieval culture, honor is life itself. Disputes that begin over dice can end with duels in the courtyard, steel flashing under moonlight. And if a duel is denied, insulted parties may resort to secret revenge, such as sabotaging a rival's horse, burning a rival's crops, or sending mercenaries to attack their lands weeks later. Weddings, in this way, are the spark that lights many feuds. The hall grows hotter. The fire pit belches smoke into the rafters, where soot clings to the beams like black snow. The smell of sweat, spilled wine, and wet wool is overwhelming. Beneath the tables, dogs gnaw on bones, snapping at each other in the shadows. In the corner, a group of older women gather, whispering about the bride's fertility. In medieval times, a woman's entire social value is tied to her womb. Her ability to produce male heirs determines her worth, and failure means disgrace. But fertility is a mystery to medieval minds, tangled in superstition. Some guests carry charms in fair, pocket small bags of herbs, bits of coral, or dried animal parts believed to encourage childbearing. Others mutter prayers to saints like Margaret of Antioch, patron of pregnant women. And yet, if the bride fails to produce a child within the first year, suspicion will fall not only on her, but on her entire family. Rumors of witchcraft, curses, ditton, or infidelity will swirl. The stakes are higher than life or death. They are dynastic survival. Meanwhile, the priests grow nervous. Though the church oversees marriage ceremonies, it has little control over the chaos that follows. Priests perform blessings, but they cannot prevent duels or drunkenness. In private, many clergy despise these noble weddings, seeing them as sinful spectacles. Some bishops have tried to ban public bedding ceremonies or limit the length of feasts. But tradition is stronger than law. In 1278, a bishop in Flanders was excommunicated by his own congregation for refusing to bless a marriage. He deemed incestuous, though the couple shared only distant blood ties. The union was politically necessary, and the bishop's objections were ignored. In the medieval world, the church is powerful but not supreme. Politics often trumps religion. By the end of the second night, guests are collapsing where they sit. Some are carried to bed by servants. Others sleep on benches, their heads pillowed on folded cloaks. The hall is littered with remnants of the feast, cracked trenchers, spilled sauces, and the occasional broken goblet. Outside, the rain turns to sleet. A few unlucky guests slip in the courtyard mud, their fine garments ruined. But sleep does not end the danger. In medieval custom, the early morning after a wedding is the time for reckonings. Debts are tallied, promises confirmed, and grievances whispered in dark corners. It is in this twilight between celebration and aftermath that the most dangerous conversations occur. Secret pacts are made. Alliances are betrayed. Scribes scribble hastily in the margins of old ledgers, trying to capture the shifting web of loyalties born in the drunken haze of the feast. As the dawn breaks on the third day, Eleanor lies awake. In the cold marriage bed, staring at the stone ceiling above her. Her husband sleeps beside her, his face slack with exhaustion. She knows that her life has changed forever, not because of love, but because of politics wrapped in ritual. Her body is now a legal vessel for producing heirs, her alliance is set in ink and blood. Outside the manor walls, the world moves on peasants, plough fields, merchants haggle in muddy streets, and distant kings plan wars. But within the small, claustrophobic world of the medieval noble household, a wedding is not a single day's event. It is a dangerous political machine, grinding lives beneath its wheels, churning out treaties, rivalries, and often unexpected corpses. And so, as you continue listening, letting this quiet story drift into your evening, imagine the weight of these rituals pressing down on every guest in that flickering hall. Feel the tension beneath the surface of every smile, the cold sweat under embroidered tunics, the sharp glint of knives not yet drawn but always close at hand. Medieval weddings were not soft celebrations of romance. They were battlegrounds of another kind, and history has left us thousands of stories buried beneath their gilded surface. Stay with me as we continue, because there is much more to uncover. As the wedding feast of Eleanor of Berwick stretches into its third night, the mood in the manor darkens further, heavy like wet wool pressed to the skin. Outside, the sky has turned a slate gray, with low clouds hugging the hills, and the air carries the damp smell of moss, mud, and horse sweat. The cooks in the kitchen, their faces smeared with soot and fatigue, have now resorted to reheating old dishes, scraping together what remains of the salted fish, the hare stew, and the stale cloves that once lined the tables like offerings to gods of excess. There is no freshness left in the manor, not in the food, nor in the air, nor in the patience of the guests. Yet still, the rituals must continue, because medieval weddings are not single-day affairs. They are endurance tests designed to display wealth, fortitude, and social dominance. The longer you celebrate, the more powerful you appear. For nobles, it is a symbol of control. For peasants, it is a spectacle they are forced to attend, even if they cannot afford to lose 3 days of labor. But the true danger lies not in the overindulgence, but in the games of humiliation that follow. Games designed to establish pecking order beneath the thin veneer of festivity. One such game, popular among board nights, involves wagering of cans, where men clasp arms and test each other's strength by forcing the other to spill his drink. The loser owes a forfeit, sometimes a coin, sometimes a strip of cloth from his tunic, but more often a public confession of shameful secrets. In this way, medieval weddings collect their own whispered scandals like moss on ancient stone. These confessions, shared in jest, become dangerous currency later, traded in political negotiations, used for blackmail, or whispered to enemies during times of war. It is not unusual for a marriage alliance to be broken months after a wedding because of something muttered drunkenly during a feast. A careless story told over mead might become the spark that burns down an entire estate. Inside the hall, Eleanor's new husband, Godfrey, struggles to maintain his dignity. His face is pale, and the cut above his eyebrow left by Baldwin of Locksley during the wrestling bout has crusted into a thin line of dried blood. Yet he smiles, because to stop smiling would be to admit defeat. Gunner around him. Men roar with laughter as a jester performs a grotesque mimicry of the bride and groom's bedding ceremony, leaping onto the long table and humping a pillow to howls of crude delight. Such mock performances of intimacy are not seen. As offensive in this era, they are expected. Medieval weddings blend sacred vows with bawdy farce, the solemnity of the church with the lewd humor of the tavern. In some parts of Europe, these plays are organized formally, sanctioned by local customs. In others, They erupt spontaneously, fueled by ale and old resentments. The line between celebration and degradation is thin, and Eleanor, barely a teenager, sits frozen in her chair, her cheeks burning as the men laugh around her. No one asks how she feels. Her body has been transformed from person to symbol, from daughter to vessel of alliance, and the ritual humiliation she endures is just part of the transaction. Meanwhile, the threat of disease simmers invisibly in the crowded hall. Medieval medical knowledge is limited to the balancing of humors, leeching, and the occasional herbal poultice. Hygiene is minimal. Shared cups passed from mouth to mouth, and trencher-stick slabs of stale bread are reused. Until they disintegrate, spilt food collects on the rushes that line the floor, creating a stew of grease, dirt, and crumbs where rats scurry openly. In this environment, sickness spreads easily. In 1348, just 2 decades after this wedding, the Black Death will sweep through Europe, but even before the plague, feast fevers were common. Fevers that begin after weddings are often deadly, yet no one dares refuse an invitation. To stay away from a noble wedding is to insult the host, and in a world where alliances are fragile, insult can mean war. So the guests attend, knowing full well that they may be bringing illness back to their manors, their villages, their families. Some will die from wounds inflicted in drunken brawls. Others will die from the unseen poison of infection, the bacteria festering in wounds or the rot growing in their guts. But no one will speak of this openly. The danger of a medieval wedding is accepted, like the risk of riding into battle. At the center of it all, the symbolic rituals continue. A priest steps forward to bless the leftovers of the feast, a strange custom rooted in superstition. In some regions, leftover food from a wedding is buried in the earth to ensure the fertility of the bride. In others, bones from the feast are boiled to make broth for the bride's first child, even if that child is still only imagined in whispers. Every act, no matter how small, carries the weight of magical thinking. Guests throw coins into a bowl, the water for luck, murmur charms against infertility, and exchange small tokens, lockets of hair, embroidered handkerchiefs, or rings to cement secret pacts beneath the surface of the public celebration. Some of these pacts will blossom into political marriages. Others will turn into betrayals. In medieval society, trust is rarely given freely, and weddings are the places where it is most dangerously tested. Then comes the mock bride stealing, another perilous tradition. In some parts of medieval Europe, the groom's friends pretend to steal the bride from her bedchamber during the feast, carrying her around the hall while singing lewd songs. This ritual is meant to symbolize the transition from maidenhood to wifehood, but it often turns violent. In more than one recorded case, the bride has been injured or worse during these games. Some are dropped from shoulders, others faint from fear, and a few are so roughly handled that they are left bruised and bleeding before being returned to their husband. Yet, the practice persists because it is considered part of the fun. For the men involved, it is a way to display dominance, to test boundaries, and sometimes to punish the bride's family for perceived slights. In Eleanor's case, her father watches nervously as Baldwin and his companions suggest beginning the game. But her mother intervenes, feigning a sudden illness to distract the hall, and the bride stealing is postponed for now. As the hours crawl on, another set of dangerous entertainments begins, the boasting contests. Men rise one by one to deliver speeches about their greatest deeds, slaying wild boars, surviving sieges, betting women of high rank. These boasts are expected, but they are also traps. If a boast is too large, too unbelievable, the audience may call for proof. In medieval culture, honor is performative, and men must be ready to defend their words with action. A boast about slaying a giant boar may result in a hunt the next morning, organized on the spot. If the hunter fails, he is mocked, sometimes even physically punished. In 1333, a knight in Burgundy was forced to eat a portion of his own hunting hound's flesh, after failing to live up to a boast he made during a wedding feast. The punishment was ceremonial, but the humiliation was real, and the knight died of infection from a later duel fought over the incident. In this way, wedding boasts plant the seeds of violence that can blossom weeks or months later. Back in the hall, the musicians are too drunk to play properly. The rebec squeals off-key, and the drummer misses beats, but no one cares. The rhythm of the wedding has slipped into a strange twilight phase, where reality feels blurred by exhaustion and intoxication. The flickering torchlight casts shadows, daran that seem to move on their own. In the corners, servants quietly gather leftovers, trying to pocket scraps for their families. Up above them, in the gallery where noblewomen sit cloaked in furs. Quiet conversations about dowries, pregnancies, and future marriages continue, weaving new plots even as the current wedding remains unfinished. For medieval women, marriage is not a fairy tale, it is a cycle of survival, a constant negotiation between childbirth and death. Eleanor's marriage is only the first link in a long chain of expected pregnancies, most of which will be dangerous, many of which will end in stillbirth or the mother's death. Yet, this is not spoken of openly. The facade of celebration must be maintained, even when everyone knows the risks. As the third night closes, and the first whispers of dawn begin to creep under the cracks of the manor's shutters, the final rituals approach. The legal witnesses must sign off on the consummation. In some regions, this is done through actual witnesses in the bedchamber. In others, through symbolic gestures carrying the stained bedsheet into the hall or presenting the bride's garter as proof. These practices are humiliating, intrusive, and often traumatic, but they are considered essential to medieval law. Without proof of consummation, the marriage can be annulled, the dowry returned, and political alliances shattered. So the couple must perform, even under duress. Kinga, in the cold upper room of the manor. Eleanor lies beside Godfrey, their hands trembling as they clutch the coarse linen sheets. Outside the chamber, the murmurs of guests filter through the wooden walls. A soft, persistent hum of curiosity and cruelty. For them, the bedding ceremony is entertainment. For the couple inside, it is a nightmare dressed in silk and legal obligation. And so the cycle continues. Another wedding added to the long ledger of history. Another night of danger disguised as joy. As you listen, somewhere in the quiet of your room or in the stillness of your own evening, let your mind wander back to those cold torchlit halls where the flicker of fire reflects off swords, goblets, and frightened eyes. Medieval. Weddings were not simply about union, they were about power, performance, and survival. And this is only the beginning of the world that waits beneath the surface of history. Stay with me, because there is much more to tell as the weak dawn light seeps into the cracks of the manor's shutters. The guests at Eleanor's wedding stir from uneasy sleep, their bodies aching from nights spent on hard benches or bundled in cloaks in the corners of the hall. The smell of sweat, spilled wine, and stale food hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the faint trace of damp straw scattered on the rush-covered floors to soak up filth. Outside, the village roosters crow, oblivious to the fact that for the Lord's ladies inside, the day is only beginning its next phase of danger. The fourth day of the wedding is about settling debts, both financial and emotional. Servants move quietly through the hall, careful not to wake the more volatile guests too soon. Coins exchange hands under the table's losers of drunken wagers, paying their dues, sometimes in silver, sometimes in promises. Promises in medieval society are not casual. They are binding oaths, often sworn before witnesses or upon relics. A man who promises to send his daughter as a ward to another lord's household might find, years later, that he has lost her forever to a political marriage he cannot control. A whispered agreement over dice might result in the transfer of grazing rights, hunting privileges, or even military support in a future feud. These soft murmurs in the shadow of the feast hall are just as dangerous as the loud brawls from the night before, perhaps even more so. Medieval society thrives on these quiet, dangerous agreements, where one careless word can tie a family to obligations it cannot escape. And for the bride's father, Sir Walter of Berwick, the dawn after his daughter's wedding is a time of calculation and regret. He paces in the cold morning air outside the hall, cloaked in a fur mantle despite the sweat beading at his temples. He knows that the alliance he's forged with the Northmeres through this marriage is unstable. Godfrey is weak, politically and physically, and Sir Walter can already sense the whispers beginning among his guests' rumors that his daughter's husband is unfit to lead, unfit to fight, perhaps even unfit to produce heirs. This is not love or romance. This is dynastic engineering, and it is dangerously flawed. Inside, the servants have begun the grim task of cleaning the hall. They scrape congealed fat from wooden platters, shoo away dogs fighting over bones, and pour fresh rushes onto the floor to cover the stains of spilled ale and worse. But hidden in the corners of the manor, the real consequences of the wedding are beginning to bloom. In the kitchens, a scullery maid weeps quietly as she hides in a dark alcove, her apron clutched to her face. She was cornered by a drunken squire, Turin, during the second night of the feast, and now she fears the worst pregnancy, scandal, or a beating if her mistress finds out. In medieval society, servants have no protection against such abuses. Weddings are dangerous for them, not because of political maneuvering, but because of the raw vulnerability that comes from being invisible to the noble eye. Her fate will not be recorded in any chronicle, but her life, too, is altered by this marriage, caught in the ripples of the great family's dangerous games. Back in the great hall, the nobles gather groggily for morning mass, wiping their eyes with embroidered sleeves as the priest chants Latin prayers no one listens to. The church ceremony serves as a fragile boundary between the chaos of the feast and the order of religion, but everyone knows it is just for show. Even the priest, Father Ulrich, mutters the words mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He worries about a confession he heard the night before from a knight who killed a man at a previous wedding and left the body buried in a shallow grave beyond the manor walls. There was no penance given. The knight had laughed when he told the story, claiming it was part of the game. Father Ulrich has heard it all before. The medieval priest is both witness and prisoner to a world where sin and ritual intertwine so closely that they cannot be untangled. And this morning's prayers are no shield against the reality that today, too, could end in blood. After Mass, the morning hunt is announced a traditional part of noble weddings, but one that often results in more danger than joy. Guests saddle their horses, fastening cloaks over mail shirts and checking the sharpness of their hunting spears. The boar hunt is not a leisurely ride. It is a violent, bloody affair, where men prove their masculinity by chasing wild beasts through the cold, muddy woods. In the medieval world, hunting is not just sport, it is political theater, a demonstration of courage, skill, and dominance over nature. Spot boars are not docile prey. They are aggressive, fast, and capable of gutting a man with a single charge. Many knights return from hunts with broken bones, slashed legs, or worse. In 1283, Prince Llewellyn of Wales famously lost a cousin to a boar during a wedding hunt, the animal driving its tusks into the man's groin and killing him in minutes. Yet the custom continues. because not hunting would be seen as cowardice, especially at a wedding where every gesture is a public test. Godfrey knows this, and though he is terrified, he mounts his horse, his hands shaking so badly that the squire must tighten the girth strap twice. Still Eleanor watches from the manor gates, her lips pressed into a thin line. She knows that if her husband is injured or killed today, the political alliance her father arranged will collapse, and she will be left a widow before she has even finished unpacking her dowry chest. The hunt begins at the edge of the dark forest, where the peasants have driven wild boars into the clearings, using dogs and sharpened sticks. The knights ride forward in a loose formation, shouting and laughing, but beneath their mirth is a tense undercurrent of fear. The boar spear, with its broad blade and crossbar to prevent overpenetration, is a deadly but necessary tool. Wounds from a boar are often fatal, even to armored knights. The creature's tusks slice through flesh as easily as cloth, and infection is almost guaranteed if the wound is not immediately cauterized. But no one will refuse to ride today, because, in the medieval code of honor, to decline the hunt is to admit weakness, and weakness is as good as death. The boars charge from the underbrush, and chaos erupts. Horses rear, dogs howl, and men scream as they hurl spears and try to keep their mounts from bolting. One night, Sir Thomas of Grey is thrown from his horse, landing hard on the frozen ground. A boar barrels toward him, but before it can strike, Baldwin of Locksley, still nursing his wounded pride from the feast, drives his spear through the animal's neck, saving Sir Thomas, but doing so with a grin that says, "Remember who saved you." This, too, is a political act, a favor that will be called upon later, perhaps in a courtroom, perhaps on a battlefield. Back at the manor, Eleanor prepares for the gift exchange that follows the junta ritual, where the family's present tokens tow one another, reinforcing the fragile alliance. Her mother adjusts her gown, smoothing the embroidered fabric over her shoulders. Each stitch in the garment represents hours of labor by seamstresses whose names will never be recorded. Yet the dress is not for beauty, it is a political statement. Fine cloth shows wealth, embroidery signals connections, and the display of such garments is part of the power game. The gifts, too, are symbolic weapons. A poorly chosen gift can spark insult. A gift too grand can suggest superiority. In 1307, a wedding between two noble houses in Aquitaine ended in bloodshed when the groom's father presented a sword to his new son-in-law, only for the bride's family to interpret it as a veiled threat. That night, the feast turned into a massacre. Eleanor's father knows this history well, and he instructs his steward to present a set of matched falcon's birds trained for hunting, their hoods stitched with both family crests side by side. It is a calculated gesture, meant to display unity, but beneath it lies the same tension that colors every action in this long, dangerous celebration. As the day closes, and the guests return from the hunt, some limping, some flushed with triumph, the mood in the manor remains precarious. The final phase of the wedding looms, the clan oaths, where lesser vassals swear loyalty not just to their lords but to the union itself. This is done before witnesses, often with hands pressed to holy relics or ancient swords. These oaths are binding under pain of death. A man who breaks his word can be exiled, dismembered, or branded a traitor. In 1355, during a wedding in Saxony, a vassal who refused to swear fealty at the ceremony was executed on the spot, his body thrown into a moat while the feast continued. The oaths are not mere formality, they are contracts of survival, woven into the social fabric as tightly as the bride's veil is woven with gold thread. As the final goblets are drained and the last embers in the hearth fade to ash, Eleanor sits quietly in her chamber, staring at her reflection in the polished bronze mirror. Her face is the same, yet everything has changed. She is no longer a girl of Berwick. She is now the Lady of Northmere, whether she wishes it or not, bound by the invisible chains of bloodline, land, and legacy. The wedding is over, but the consequences have only just begun. Outside, the guests prepare to leave, their carts loaded with leftover meats, fabrics, and favors. But they carry home more than just physical gifts. They carry gossip, secrets, and the seeds of future conflicts whispered in dark corners during the long nights of the feast. For in the medieval world, a wedding is not a safe haven. It is the first battle in a lifetime of political war. And so, as you drift further into this quiet history, imagine the cold air of that dawn, the echo of hooves fading into the distance, and the weight of obligations pressing down on every heart in the hall. Medieval weddings were ceremonies wrapped in danger, and their echoes still haunt the dusty corners of forgotten chronicles. Stay with me, because our journey into this hidden world has only just begun, as the guests depart from Eleanor's wedding, their carts groaning under the weight of leftover meats, wine casks, and hastily wrapped parcels of gifts. The manor settles into a deceptive silence. But beneath this quiet, the true aftermath of a medieval wedding begins to unfold, a slow, creeping ripple of consequences that will travel far beyond the manor walls, infecting every corner of the social web. In the medieval world, a wedding is not an isolated event, but the opening move in a long, dangerous game of alliances, feuds, and succession crises. The political chessboard has been rearranged. Old promises have been broken silently during whispered conversations at the feast. New debts have been created under the haze of wine, and every guest leaves with a mind full of calculations. Some will ride home planning marriages of their own. Others will ride home nursing grudges, already plotting subtle revenge for insults received beneath the guise of celebration. For Eleanor, the danger is just beginning. In the dim chamber where she now sleeps as Lady of Northmere, her future has been locked in place by contracts written in both ink and expectation. Her body is no longer entirely hers. It is a vessel for producing heirs, a pawn on the dynastic board. The first question every noble family asks after a wedding is not about love or happiness, it's about pregnancy. The pressure begins immediately. Servants will watch for signs, missed courses at the table, changes in appetite, a hand resting too long on the stomach. Midwives, often more feared than trusted, will whisper diagnoses based on moon cycles and humoral theory, applying leeches or prescribing herbal brews to encourage conception. But medieval medicine is a mixture of superstition and dangerous experimentation. Some fertility treatments involve mercury, others crushed animal organs, and the bride has no say in the matter. Eleanor's mother has already prepared a charm, bag a tiny sack of herbs and bones to hide beneath her daughter's pillow, believing it will protect against miscarriage. Yet, history tells us that in this world, childbirth is one of the greatest killers of women. A noblewoman like Eleanor will likely face 6 to 10 pregnancies in her lifetime, and she has a 1 in 3 chance of dying in the process. Maternal mortality is not an unusual tragedy, it is an expected risk, quietly accepted by medieval families as part of the social contract. While Eleanor adjusts to her new role, the manor scribes begin the work of recording the legal aspects of the wedding. In a cold chamber lit by a single beeswax candle, clerks bend over parchment, scratching notes in Latin, their quills dipping into iron gall ink. These documents are not romantic records of union but property agreements, carefully listing the transfer of land, livestock, and feudal duties. If a dispute arises years later, these scribbled contracts will be brought out in court, and the details of who gave what to whom on this day will determine the future of entire estates. But medieval records are notoriously fragile. Parchment can be destroyed by fire, eaten by rats, or simply misplaced. Literacy is rare, and many nobles cannot read the contracts they sign. They rely on clerks, priests, and notaries who may have their own political loyalties. In 1312, a scribe in Burgundy was hanged for altering a marriage contract, inserting a clause that changed the inheritance of an entire estate in favor of his cousin. Such quiet acts of treachery often go unnoticed until it is too late. In Eleanor's case, the scribes finished their work quickly, rolling the parchment into scrolls to be stored in iron-bound chests beneath the manor's chapel, where they will gather dust until needed, usually in court, during a dispute, or after someone's unexpected death. Beyond the walls of the manor, news of the wedding travels quickly, carried by travelers, merchants, and minstrels who embellish the story with each retelling. Medieval villages thrive on gossip, and a noble wedding is prime material. In the marketplaces of nearby towns, bakers and blacksmiths will repeat tales of the feast, the wrestling match, the near-duel, the boasting contests as if they had witnessed them firsthand. Every retelling adds new details. Someone will claim Baldwin of Locksley nearly killed the groom. Others will whisper that the bride fainted in terror during the bedding ceremony, though no one outside the manor truly knows what happened behind closed doors. These stories grow like ivy, twisting through the social memory of the region, feeding into future rivalries and alliances. Weddings are social glue, but they are also breeding grounds for rumors, and in a world without newspapers or official records, the spoken word carries dangerous power. A rumor can ruin a marriage, spark a war, or tarnish a family name for generations. Kin 1324. The rumor that a bride in northern France had poisoned her husband during the wedding feast led to the execution of her entire household, though no proof was ever found. The medieval mind is primed for suspicion, and weddings offer fertile ground for paranoia. Meanwhile, the economy of the wedding leaves its mark. Hosting a noble wedding is ruinously expensive, often pushing families into debt that lasts for years. The Barrack family will now face the task of repaying the loans they took to fund the 3-day feasts, the barrels of imported wine, the exotic spices purchased at ruinous prices, the musicians hired from distant towns. Medieval weddings are not just about display, they are performances of power, and failing to provide enough hospitality can damage a family's reputation irreparably. To run out of food or drink is considered a humiliation. Guests expect abundance, even if it bankrupts the host. In 1305, the wedding of Lady Alice de Lisle nearly collapsed politically when the kitchen ran out of swan meat, and the guests interpreted it as an omen of famine and decline. Her father was forced to sell a portion of his lands to recover from the financial blow. Eleanor's father knows this too, and he has mortgaged parts of his estate to pay for the event, gambling on the hope that this marriage will bring him political stability. But such gambles often fail. In many cases, the debts incurred during a wedding lead directly to feuds, land disputes, or even rebellion when tenants are taxed too heavily to repay the costs. For the peasants in the nearby villages, the wedding is over, but the aftershocks are just beginning. They will bear the brunt of the financial strain: higher rents, increased tithes, forced labor on the lord's lands to compensate for the expenses of the feast. In the medieval social order, the joy of the nobility is often the suffering of the poor. Yet peasant weddings are simpler affairs, held in fields or barns, with bread and ale instead of gilded trenchers and exotic meats. Even so, these smaller weddings carry their own dangers. In rural villages, weddings often serve as cover for settling old scores. Fights break out between neighboring families, fueled by ale and remembered insults. In 1379, in a village near York, a peasant wedding ended in a riot when a dispute over grazing rights was rekindled during the dancing. 4 men died, and the local lord imposed harsh penalties on the survivors, forcing them into labor contracts that lasted for decades. Marriage, in any social class, is never just personal. It is communal, political, and often fatal. As the weeks pass after Eleanor's wedding, the machinery of inheritance grinds into motion. The families begin to plan for the next generation. The couple is expected to produce a male heir within the first year. Failure to do so will spark rumors of impotence or infidelity. In medieval belief, infertility is often blamed on the woman. Care, regardless of medical reality. Midwives, astrologers, and priests will be consulted. Eleanor may be subjected to bizarre treatments, being made to sleep with fertility relics, to drink potions of wolf marrow or powdered sapphire, or to bathe in holy water mixed with rose petals from a monastery garden. None of these methods are effective, but the failure will always fall upon her shoulders, not her husband's. This burden is one of the unspoken dangers of medieval marriage, a silent terror that hangs over every noblewoman's life in the broader world beyond Eleanor's. Manor, similar stories unfold daily. Weddings ignite civil wars, trigger assassinations, and reshape kingdoms. The marriage of Isabella of France to Edward II in 1308 was meant to secure peace between England and France, but instead it planted the seeds of rebellion, leading to Edward's eventual deposition and murder. The marriage of Margaret of Anjou to Henry VI in 1445 brought not peace, but the Wars of the Roses. Each time two families join. The hope is for alliance, but more often the result is chaos. The medieval world is a fragile tapestry woven from oaths, feasts, and dangerous promises. And weddings are the points where the threads are most likely to snap. So tonight, as you listen quietly, letting the echoes of this story fill the spaces, bits, between your thoughts, imagine the manor empty now. The feast tables cleared, the banners taken down. The guests have gone home, but their words linger like smoke in the rafters. In the shadows of the cold stone walls, secrets still hang in the care. A wedding has ended, but the battles it has set in motion are just the beginning. There will be disputes over land, quiet revenge over insults whispered during the feast, and perhaps even wars launched because of a look exchanged across the high table. Medieval weddings were not safe, not soft, and never truly over. They were elaborate gambles with human lives as the stakes, and long after the music faded, the consequences marched on, year after year. Stay with me, because our journey into this dangerous history is far from finished. In the weeks following Eleanor's wedding, the heavy doors of the manor remain closed to outsiders, but within those stone walls, the machinery of medieval life grinds on relentlessly, powered by expectations. No one dares defy. The bride's days are now dictated by ritual and scrutiny, her every action monitored by servants, midwives, and family retainers whose job is not just to serve her, but to observe her. Every sip of broth, every hour of sleep, every shift in her mood is catalogued as possible evidence of conception or failure. A noblewoman's worth is tied not to her intelligence, her kindness, or her character, but to the condition of her womb. And in the first months after marriage, this obsession becomes all-consuming. Her maids track her bleeding cycles by marking charcoal on the back of a wooden door, and her mother-in-law consults with priests about saints who might assist with fertility. Saint Margaret, Saint Anne, Saint Brigidich, representing another thread of hope in a tangled net of superstition. Eleanor herself says little. Her role is to endure, not to complain, and so she moves through her new life with quiet resignation. The fabric of her days stitched together by embroidery, prayer, and the careful performance of obedience. But beneath this surface of calm lies current of fear, because in the medieval world, a barren bride is a political liability, and the consequences of failing to produce an heir can be lethal. Annulment is not the only risk. In some families, Whispers of sorcery are stirred when a noblewoman fails to conceive. Tales of witches stealing fertility, of jealous rivals cursing wedding beds, circulate like smoke through the corridors of every great house. In 1321, Lady Clarice of Anjou was accused of witchcraft by her husband's family after 5 years of childlessness. Despite the fact that her husband was known to be secretly consorting with men, Clarice was imprisoned, tortured, and died in a convent, though her crime had been nothing more than infertility. Such stories haunt Eleanor's nights, unspoken but ever present in the cold air of her chamber. Beyond the personal dangers, the political landscape after a wedding becomes a delicate web of new obligations, some of which are already unraveling. The Borwick and Northmere families have promised mutual defense, but the ink on these agreements is barely dry before the first tensions emerge. A dispute over grazing rights in the southern pastures flares up, and messengers ride back and forth, between the manors, carrying letters sealed with wax, their contents full of polite threats. These letters are written in flowery Latin, but beneath the formal language lies a simple truth. The wedding has not solved the family's problems. It has merely postponed them. In medieval England, land is not just property, it is power. Every inch of pasture, every acre of forest carries political weight because it feeds animals, generates taxes, and supports armies. Control of land is control of life itself, and marriage is just one of the tools used to secure it. But when two families marry, their borders collide like tectonic plates, and the friction often leads to earthquakes. Eleanor's father, Sir Walter of Berwick, knows this well. He is already drafting letters to neighboring lords, preparing alliances in case the Northmeres reneged on their promises. This is the silent war that follows a medieval wedding, not fought with swords, at least not yet, but with parchment, ink, and messengers on horseback galloping across muddy roads, while the noble families play their dangerous games. The common folk in the villages adjust to the aftermath of the feast in their own way. The servants who attended the wedding now return to their homes, carrying tales of the events like living newspapers. But these stories are not just entertainment. They shape the social fabric of the community. In an age without written chronicles, for ordinary people, oral history becomes reality. The blacksmith tells his wife that the groom was weak, that the bride looked afraid, that the knights brawled and the food made half the guests sick. The baker repeats the rumor that Baldwin of Locksley intends to challenge Godfrey for control of certain lands. These tales twist and grow, feeding into local politics. In time, they will become part of the village's collective memory, shaping how the common folk view their lords and deciding who they will support in future disputes. In medieval society, loyalty is not guaranteed. It must be maintained through careful performance and the management of reputation. A wedding that appears weak or chaotic sends signals to everyone watching that a family is vulnerable. And in the brutal hierarchy of feudal life, vulnerability is a scent that draws wolves. Meanwhile, the religious aspects of marriage continue long after the vows are spoken. The local priest, Father Ulrich, is tasked with guiding the couple's spiritual life, ensuring that their union is sanctified not just by law but by God. But this too is fraught with danger. The Church teaches that marital relations are for procreation only, and yet the clergy are often the keepers of the very rituals and prayers that medieval couples used to try to influence conception. There is no true separation between faith and superstition in this era. They exist in a tangled, codependent relationship. Eleanor and Godfrey are instructed to fast on certain days, to avoid relations during certain phases of the moon, to pray specific psalms before bed. They may be given relics to sleep beside a splinter from the true cross, a vial of saint's blood, a piece of cloth said to have touched the Virgin Mary. These objects are believed to hold power, and refusing to use them could be seen as heresy. But sometimes the very priests who bless these relics are engaged in political manipulation themselves. Father Ulrich, for example, has long accepted bribes from the Northmeres in exchange for favorable sermons, and he is careful to mention the family's generosity during Sunday Mass. Religion in the medieval world is not merely about salvation, it is about control, and weddings are one of the main stages upon which this control is performed. In the shadows of the manor, another form of danger brews, the risk of inheritance disputes among the extended family. Younger brothers, disinherited by marriage contracts that favor the bride and groom, begin to plot their own futures. In a world where primogeniture, the right of the firstborn son to inherit everything's the rule, younger sons often become mercenaries, monks, or schemers. Some join the church to secure positions of power within religious institutions. Others seek fortunes through marriage or military service, and a few turn to outright rebellion. In 1311, the younger brother of a lord in Cornwall poisoned his own brother's wife during a wedding feast, hoping to collapse the alliance and regain control of the family lands. These quiet rivalries simmer beneath the surface of every noble household, and in the weeks after a wedding they often come to a boil. Godfrey's younger brother, Simon of Northmere, has already begun stirring trouble, spreading rumors that his brother is incapable of fathering children, whispering doubts into the ears of loyal retainers. In time, these whispers may become weapons sharper than any blade. The physical world also conspires against the newlyweds. Medieval England is a place of harsh weather, unpredictable harvests, and disease, all of which can transform a political marriage into a disaster. If the harvest fails, the financial strain of the wedding becomes catastrophic. Already, signs of crop failure are visible in the fields. The winter was long, the spring late, and the sheep are thin. If famine follows, the alliance between the Berwick's and Northmeres may dissolve under the pressure of survival. In times of scarcity, promises are easily broken. Lords may raid each other's lands for grain. Marriages annulled under claims of spiritual impurity, and alliances rewritten in blood. Spas. The entire social order is balanced on the edge of hunger, and weddings, no matter how grand, cannot escape this reality. As the summer months unfold, and the initial glow of the wedding fades, the true cost of the event reveals itself. Eleanor's father finds himself in negotiations with creditors, pledging future rents and tithes to pay off debts incurred by the feast. The Northmeres sent envoys to the royal court, seeking favor to strengthen their position against rival lords emboldened by whispers of weakness. Godfrey, pressured by his mother and uncles, begins training daily with his swordmaster, knowing that failure in the next skirmish or tournament will confirm the rumors of his incompetence. Eleanor, meanwhile, navigates the labyrinth of her new household, learning the names of servants, managing the stores of food and linen, overseeing the daily operations of the manor. These tasks are not ceremonial, they are survival. A noblewoman who cannot run her household risks starvation for her people, rebellion among her staff, and disgrace for her family. In medieval life, the domestic sphere is just as political as the battlefield. At night, when the fires burn low and the world outside the manor falls silent, Eleanor sometimes sits by her window, staring out into the darkness. She can hear the wolves howling in the distant woods, their cries cutting through the cold air like knives. She knows that beyond the trees, bandits roam the roads, peasants whisper in the fields, and rival lords sharpen their blades. Her marriage was supposed to bring peace, but peace in the medieval world is a fleeting illusion, a fragile truce that masks the constant threat of collapse. She wraps her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the embroidered symbols of her family crest. Her body is sore from ritual fasting, her mind heavy with the weight of duty. Yet she says nothing, For silence is safer than speech in a world where every word can be turned into a weapon. And so, as you listen quietly, perhaps lying in your own bed, safe in a time far removed from this brutal past, imagine the stone walls of that manor, cold and unyielding, holding within them the echoes of a wedding that has not ended, but merely transformed into a lifetime of dangerous negotiation. Medieval weddings were not just ceremonies. They were the first chapters in stories of intrigue, survival, and power struggles that lasted for decades. The vows spoken in candlelight were only the beginning. The real battles came later, in the long nights of waiting, in the cold calculations of fathers and sons, and in the whispered plans made under cover of darkness. Stay with me, because this history is far from over. As autumn settles over the manor of Northmere, the leaves in the surrounding forests turn from green to ochre and rust, drifting slowly to the muddy ground like forgotten parchment pages. The echoes of Eleanor's wedding have not faded. They have only shifted into quieter, more insidious forms. The grand feast is over, the banners packed away, the garlands rotted in their buckets, but the consequences continue to ferment, hidden beneath layers of daily life. In the manor kitchens, the servants speak in hushed tones about the new ladies, pale complexion and her sudden silences. The older women nod knowingly, claiming these are signs of early pregnancy. Others whisper that she has been cursed, that the spirits of the forest, angered by the cutting of sacred groves for the wedding feast, have marked her for misfortune. The medieval world is not just physical, it is spiritual, layered with superstitions, as thick as the fog that rolls in from the moors each morning. Every stomachache is a potential omen, every miscarriage a sign of divine wrath, every successful birth a narrow escape from death. The line between medicine, magic, and religion is not just blurred, it is non-existent. Eleanor herself is caught in this net, forced to drink bitter herbal concoctions prescribed by local midwives, while her mother-in-law lights beeswax candles, before relics of obscure saints whose names no one remembers. In the manor chapel, the priest mumbles prayers for fertility while secretly pocketing coins from both families, promising to say extra masses for the unborn heir's safety. Yet, no one truly knows what fate has in store. In the medieval world, life and death are decided as much by luck as by ritual, and Eleanor drifts through her days like a ghost wrapped in velvet, waiting for her body to betray her with either blood or the swelling of her belly. Meanwhile, the political web around the marriage tightens. The families of Berwick and Northmere are now bound together not just by vows but by interconnected feudal obligations. And each day brings new tensions. Messengers arrive weekly, their horses foaming at the mouth, carrying letters sealed with wax stamps pressed hastily in candlelight. Disputes over dowry payments have begun. The Berwicks claim that the Northmeres have underpaid the agreed sum. The Northmeres argue that the Berwicks failed to deliver all the promised livestock. What was meant to be a wedding alliance has become a legal nightmare, and medieval law is a tangled mess of customs, local rules, and church mandates. There are no standardized courts, no central authority to mediate these quarrels fairly. Justice belongs to whoever has the most knights, the sharpest scribes, or the loudest supporters in the royal court. Lawsuits drag on for decades, and while the ink dries on parchment scrolls, fields lie fallow, tenants suffer, and resentment simmers. In Eleanor's case, her father is already considering sending a cousin to petition the king's justiciar, hoping to tilt the legal balance in his favor. But this maneuver risks alienating the Northmeres further, and with winter approaching, the last thing any lord wants is a feud that cuts off trade routes or provokes raids. Yet that is exactly how many noble marriages are not in love or partnership, but in border skirmishes and retaliatory violence. The marriage bed transformed into a battlefield by proxy dart inside the manor. The rhythms of daily life attempt to resume, but everything feels different now. The servants, who cleaned the hall after the wedding feast, whisper about the dark stains they found beneath the rushes wine. Yes, but also blood, perhaps from a cut hand or a brawl gone too far. In medieval households, violence is ordinary, woven into the fabric of life like the warp and weft of a tapestry. Fights over land, inheritance, and honor erupt not just in grand wars, but in kitchens, courtyards, and feast halls. In some households, men-at-arms are kept on staff not just for defense, but for domestic enforcement, punishing peasants, rivals, or even family members who step out of line. In Eleanor's new home, these tensions hang in the air like the smoke from the central hearth, curling into every corner. Her husband, Godfrey, practices daily with his sword, desperate to prove himself worthy of the alliance. His failures at the wedding feast still haunt him. He has begun to train with the manor's master-at-arms, waking at dawn to drill in the courtyard, swinging his blade until his hands blister and crack. Yet skill at arms is only part of survival. In the medieval world, strength is political, and knowing when to use it or when to pretend you will is half the battle. Godfrey's uncle has begun advising him on strategies for asserting dominance over his tenants and vassals, suggesting small shows of cruelty to instill respect. Hang a poacher, he says. Beat a steward in front of the others. These are not acts of random cruelty. They are calculated performances meant to solidify power. Fear maintains order as much as law does, and in the fragile social balance of a manor house, one weak lord can cause the entire structure to collapse. For Eleanor, these lessons in power are quieter but no less dangerous. She learns to manage the household accounts, counting sacks of grain, tracking the salt stores, ensuring the winter larder is stocked. She oversees the weaving room, where servants spin wool into cloth, and the dairy, where butter is churned and cheese aged. But beneath these domestic tasks lies a deeper responsibility, controlling the social order of the manor's inner life. A noblewoman must keep the servants in line, prevent theft, discourage scandal, and manage the delicate relationships between maids, stewards, and guards. A single affair between a lady's maid and a knight can cause a ripple of gossip that reaches neighboring lords, leading to shame or even blackmail. In some households, women like Eleanor wield power not with swords but with reputation, managing whispers like other women manage spices in the kitchen, carefully, sparingly, but with the knowledge that the wrong mixture can kill. Eleanor writes letters to her mother in secret, asking for advice on managing her husband's moods and the increasingly intrusive attentions of Baldwin of Locksley, whose lecherous comments during the feast have not stopped with the wedding's end. Her mother's reply arrives weeks later, sewn into the hem of a cloak delivered by a trusted servant. It reads simply, "Smile at danger, daughter. Smile until your enemies forget you have teeth." Outside the manor, the natural world mirrors the human one. The forests grow darker, the days shorter. Wolves edge closer to the villages, drawn by the scent of livestock and the thinning boundary between wild and civilized spaces. In medieval Europe, nature is not romanticized, is feared, respected, and fought against daily. The villagers burn pine torches at night, hang charms on their doorways, and whisper prayers to keep the beasts at bay. Superstition seeps into every action. Women tie red threads around their waists to protect unborn children. Men carry iron knives to ward off spirits. Farmers sprinkle salt at the thresholds of barns to keep demons from spoiling the milk. The marriage of Eleanor and Godfrey, too, has been folded into this web of belief. Some say the wedding was cursed because a black cat crossed the manor threshold the morning of the feast. Others blame the unseasonal frost that followed. a sign that the gods or perhaps the old pagan spirits of the land disapprove of the union. In medieval thought, the line between human failure and cosmic punishment is razor thin. Every miscarriage, every bad harvest, every sudden death is a sign of imbalance, and weddings often tip the scales. Meanwhile, the larger world beyond the manor's walls churns with its own storms. Kings die, popes argue, crusades are planned. The royal court is a swirling pool of ambition, betrayal, and shifting allegiances. The marriage of minor lords like the Berwickes and Northmeres is but a single thread in a vast tapestry of dynastic scheming. Yet each small union feeds into the larger structure. Marriages decide borders, control trade routes, and settle or spark wars. In London, clerks record the births and deaths of nobles in careful, cramped script, while merchants watch the tides, hoping political peace will keep the harbors open for trade. In distant monasteries, monks copy legal documents, and chronicles, sometimes altering them subtly to favor their patrons. Cane in London, clerks record the births and deaths of nobles in careful, cramped script, while merchants watch the tides, hoping political peace will keep the harbors open for trade. In distant monasteries, monks copy legal documents and chronicles, sometimes altering them subtly to favor their patrons. History itself is not neutral, it is written by those with the power to commission the parchment. Back at Northmere, as winter tightens its grip, the manor's walls seem to close in. Fires burn day and night in the great hearth, but still the cold seeps through the cracks. Eleanor dreams of warmer places of Rome, of distant courts where women ride in litters and dine beneath marble columns. But she knows she will likely never leave this corner of England, her life tied to these stones, this marriage, this endless cycle of feasts and fears. Her husband's anxieties grow sharper each day, his temper shorter. When a servant drops a jug of mead in the hall, he strikes the man across the face with his ringed hand, leaving a purple mark that will last for weeks. This, too, is part of the performance of lordship, but it leaves Eleanor unsettled. She wonders if this is how all men become after marriage, or if the tension of these alliances simply warps people into harder shapes. And so, as you lie quietly, listening to this story unfold, imagine the cold stone halls of Northmere at night, the flickering torchlight, trousseau of fabric, the soft footfalls of servants walking the corridors, always watching, always wary. Medieval weddings do not end when the feast is over. They ripple outward like stones dropped in a pond, sending waves of consequence through families, villages, and kingdoms. They are not just celebrations, but political detonations, and long after the candles have guttered out, the smoke of those unions drifts on, curling into the corners of history. The danger has not passed, it has only changed shape. Stay with me, because there is more yet to tell. Winter deepens around Northmere, the moors fading under frost, the rivers slowed to sluggish sheets of ice, and the forests grown eerily still beneath their white shroud. Inside the manor, the echoes of the wedding feast have quieted, but the consequences coil tighter like a rope around every throat. In the medieval world, the real danger of marriage is not in the ceremony, but in the long cold months that follow, when survival is measured not by toasts or banners, but by whether your family can endure the weight of its new alliances without breaking. For Eleanor, the days have become a pattern of quiet terror. Each morning she touches her stomach as if she might somehow feel a new life starting beneath her skin. Yet nothing changes. Her maids bring hot compresses and bitter herbs, their faces careful, their mouths tight with the knowledge that time is not her ally. Already the whispers have begun. The Northmere servants talk behind doors, murmuring about her thinness, her pale color, the way her hands tremble when she lifts a cup. Some say she is cursed, others suggest she is barren. Eleanor knows these rumors are not idle. In the medieval mind, a noblewoman who fails to produce an heir becomes a threat to the very stability of the realm, no different from a crumbling wall or a rusted sword. Her husband, Godfrey, becomes more withdrawn each day, his frustrations simmering beneath. Polite smiles. His uncle has taken over more of the manor's affairs, quietly moving coins and contracts into his own control, preparing for the possibility that the marriage will collapse. In some households, such situations are solved with annulment. In others, with quiet poisoning. Eleanor has heard the stories brides who sicken suddenly, husbands who vanish during hunting trips, marriages that end not in court but in cold, shallow graves. No one says this aloud, but she can see it in their eyes, in the way her mother-in-law watches her, in the way the priest prays longer each Sunday, as if warding off the inevitable. Meanwhile, the political cost of the wedding continues to climb. The barracks and Northmeres have begun to clash over small matters borders, taxes, the management of shared mills and woods, but beneath these petty arguments lies a deeper fear. The marriage has not stabilized their holdings as intended. Instead, it has exposed new fractures. Peasants in the outlying villages grow restless under increased levies, demanded to pay for the debts incurred by the lavish feast. Some cannot pay at all. The winter stores are low, and the peasants say that famine often follows weddings. Not because of curses, but because the lords spend more than they can afford to impress their rivals. When food runs out, they take more from their tenants, and the tenants in turn begin to whisper rebellion. In 1315, not long before Eleanor's time, entire villages in northern England rose up after a series of expensive noble weddings drained the local granaries. The lords blamed bad weather, but the peasants knew the truth. Celebration for the few meant hunger for the many. At Northmere, the manor guards keep watch over the villages, ready to put down any signs of unrest. The stocks, dead, in the manor courtyard have not been empty since the wedding. There is always some peasant locked in them for minor offenses, stealing a loaf of bread, failing to pay a tithe, questioning a steward. Punishment is public, because in the medieval world, order is maintained by spectacle. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a policy. Inside the manor, the private lives of the household continue under this shadow. The servants gossip in the kitchens as they scrape mold from winter cheeses, stew old meat into thick, greasy broths, and mend garments by candlelight. They speak of the day the bride first arrived, her downcast eyes, her trembling hands, her silence during the feast. They recall the way the groom staggered during the hunting trip, the way Baldwin of Locksley laughed too loud, the way the priest drank too much wine. For the servants, these details are currency, passed from ear to ear like coins. In a world where social mobility is nearly impossible, information is one of the few forms of power available to the lower classes. A kitchen maid who overhears a secret can barter that knowledge for protection. A groom who knows the mistress's schedule might trade it for leniency. In the corners of the manor, life continues as it always has made scurry with buckets of rushes. Boys chop wood for the fires, and old women spin thread while murmuring prayers for the safety of the household. But everyone knows that the true danger is not outside the walls. It is inside, where family loyalty can turn to betrayal in the span of a single winter. Godfrey, pressured by his uncle and his mother, begins to spend more time with his men-at-arms, training harder, drinking more, trying to silence the whispers about his weakness. He orders new armor, commissions a falconer to bring rare birds for hunting, and plans a tournament to display his prowess. But tournaments are not harmless games. They are dangerous spectacles where accidents are often intentional, where a lance might slip and strike the wrong man, where a sword's edge might be left unblunted. Many so-called accidents in the lists are carefully planned murders, disguised as jousting mishaps. Godfrey knows this, but he cannot refuse to host the tournament, not without appearing cowardly. The social code of the medieval knight is merciless. A man who avoids combat is a man who invites rebellion. And so the tournament preparations begin, with armorers hammering in the smithy, heralds painting new banners, and squires sharpening lances in the cold morning air. Eleanor watches from the solar window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, knowing that each clang of the hammer is another note in a song of potential catastrophe. Beyond the manor, the natural world offers no mercy. Wolves take livestock from the villages, forcing peasants to risk frostbite to guard their herds. The winter wind tears at the shutters, and the thatch on many roofs sags under the weight of snow. Disease spreads easily in this season, and there are rumors of cattle plague approaching from the south. Illnesses that begin in the animal pens often leap to humans in medieval times, and the manor's physician prepares for this by boiling herbs, burning juniper to purify the air, and bleeding anyone who complains of chills. Bleeding is the standard cure for nearly every ailment, though it weakens the body further. Deaths are common in winter, and funerals frequent, but no one mourns openly. Life is too fragile, and grief is a luxury for those with time and food to spare. Eleanor attends the funeral of a steward's wife. Standing in the chapel while the cold presses against her skin, her mind elsewhere, she knows that any death within the household can become political. A servant dying might seem unimportant, but every change in staff shifts the balance of gossip, of loyalty, of secrets. As the tournament day approaches, nobles from nearby manors arrive at Northmere, bringing their own rivalries and ambitions. Guest lists at medieval tournaments are as carefully constructed as battle strategies. Every lord who arrives is measured by the size of his retinue, the quality of his armor, the sharpness of his sword. Gifts are exchanged: hunting hawks, embroidered gloves, bottles of foreign wine, but these are not tokens of friendship. They are part of a delicate ritual of one-upmanship, where giving too much or too little can tip the balance of power. Eleanor watches the arrivals from her chamber, noting who smiles too broadly, who avoids her gaze, who speaks too loudly in the hall. She has learned, in her short months of marriage, that reading these signs is as important as reading scripture. Her mother-in-law coaches her in the art of noble hospitality, warning her which lords have dangerous tempers, which knights hold grudges. A misplaced word, a glance held too long, a refusal to dance all of these can ignite conflict. On the day of the tournament, the sky is a flat gray, the ground frozen hard as iron. The field is laid out with pennants, canned pavilions, and the knights don their armor with the help of squires. Eleanor watches as her husband mounts his horse, his face pale beneath the helmet. The trumpets sound, and the jousts begin. Lances splinter, horses rear, men fall. The crowd cheers, but beneath the noise, everyone listens for the crack of bone, the gasp of a man struck too hard. In one pass, Godfrey's opponent aims high, his lance tip catching Godfrey's helm and snapping his neck back. There is a moment of stillness. No one moves, no one breathes until Godfrey rights himself, his hand shaking, but alive. The crowd exhales. The tournament continues, but Eleanor knows the message has been sent. This was not a mistake. It was a warning. Someone wants her husband dead, but not yet, not until the political consequences can be managed. As night falls and the torches are lit for the post-tournament feast, the atmosphere inside the manor is tense, brittle as ice. Men drink heavily to mask their fears, women murmur in corners, and the servants pretend not to listen as plans are made for future gatherings, for hunting trips, for more alliances sealed in marriage and blood. Eleanor sits beside Godfrey at the high table, her face composed, her hands steady, but inside she feels the cold sinking deeper into her bones. She understands now, fully, that the wedding was not the end of danger, but the beginning. Every gesture, every ritual, every feast is another layer of risk, another opportunity for ambition to turn deadly. The medieval world is not a place of safe traditions. It is a place where celebration masks strategy, and joy is often a performance staged over fear. And so, as you continue to listen, perhaps lying in your own quiet room, far from the cold of Northmere stone halls, remember that history is not always the story of battles fought on fields with banners flying. Sometimes the most dangerous battles happen in feast halls, in marriage beds, in whispered conversations over cold cups of wine. Medieval weddings were not safe unions. They were the first moves in games that often ended in ruin. Stay with me, because there is still more to uncover. The frost lingers into late winter, and inside the cold stone walls of Northmere, the mood has shifted from quiet anxiety to something sharper, brittle, frozen tension like ice about to crack beneath the weight of a heavy boot. The tournament has passed, but its echoes remain. Take. The guests who witnessed Godfrey's nearfall during the joust have carried their stories back to distant halls, each retelling slightly warped by ambition, rivalry, or fear. Some say Godfrey was brave to remount his horse after the blow. Others claim he trembled and needed help to stand. In medieval society, reputation is more fragile than steel, and once a rumor begins to spread, it cannot be recalled. Eleanor hears the whispers from her maids, from the stewards, from the priest's sacristan who repeats gossip under the guise of confession. Her husband's name has become a subject of debate at neighboring manors, and already small acts of rebellion flicker at the edges of the Northmere estate. A reeve refuses to collect taxes on time. A minor knight delays his delivery of winter oats, claiming the roads are too frozen when in truth he is testing how much disobedience the Northmere family will tolerate before reacting. These are feudal power games, subtle but deadly, where the stakes are not just pride but survival. If a lord cannot control his vassals, his rule is considered weak, and in medieval England, weakness invites collapse. Eleanor watches her husband unravel slowly beneath the weight of these expectations, his temper fraying like a cloak worn too thin at the edges. He drinks more, sleeps less, practices sword drills until his hands blister, but none of it can erase the fact that his political standing has shifted, and everyone knows it. Meanwhile, the household reels from another blow. Illness strikes the manor, creeping quietly through the servants first, then into the noble chambers. It begins with coughing, then fevers, then the unmistakable black swellings beneath the arms and groin that no one dares name aloud, though the Black Death has not yet officially returned to England. Small outbreaks of plague, typhoid, or pestilence are common, and no one understands the difference between them. Disease in the medieval world is both physical and spiritual. Priests perform masses, sprinkle holy water, and burn incense in hopes of driving out the miasma believed to cause sickness. Physicians bleed the sick, prescribe crushed emerald or powdered pearls, and administer mixtures of honey, vinegar, and herbs. But nothing works. The manor's halls grow quieter as more servants fall ill. The kitchens run on reduced staff. The laundry goes unwashed for days. The rushes on the floor begin to stink of sweat and vomit. Some servants flee the manor, risking the forest wolves and bandits rather than stay in a house they believe to be cursed. Eleanor, forbidden by custom from tending to the sick directly, watches from the upper galleries as the manor slides into a kind of controlled decay. The rituals of order breaking down piece by piece. She knows that when the household weakens, so too does its political power. Rumors of sickness spread faster than any cart or horse. Neighboring lords will hear of this before the week is out, and some will see it as an opportunity to press old claims or test the manor's defenses. The priest, Father Ulrich, performs daily prayers for protection, but he, too, is afraid. His sermons grow sharper, tinged with warnings about sin and divine punishment. Some whisper that the illness is a result of the cursed wedding, that the feast insulted local saints, that the bedding ceremony was improperly blessed, that perhaps someone in the household has secretly committed a sin so grave it has called down the wrath of God. These beliefs are not fringed, they are central to medieval thought. People live in a world where the physical and spiritual are intertwined, and a cough or fever is as much a sign of moral failing as it is of infection. Spra. Eleanor fears these whispers will land on her shoulders. As the bride, she is both symbol and scapegoat, cinematic. A woman who fails to produce an heir, who presides over a household struck by sickness, who watches her husband's reputation falter. Such a woman is always close to becoming a figure of blame, perhaps even of persecution. She thinks of the women she's heard about in distant manors, wives accused of witchcraft when fortunes failed, of mixing potions or cursing their husbands in secret. Q. In York, just a year ago, a lady was dragged from her bedchamber and tried in an ecclesiastical court for causing barrenness by unnatural prayers. Her only crime was failing to conceive after marriage. Eleanor knows how close she stands to this precipice. Meanwhile, the economy of the manor deteriorates. Trade slows as merchants avoid the estate for fear of infection. Prices for grain and salt climb. The household must dip into its stores early, risking shortages before spring. The debts from the wedding feast loom like shadows over the accounting books, and Godfrey's uncle begins to propose drastic solutions. Raise the rents, seize land from smaller tenants, perhaps even arrange a second marriage alliance to secure more coin. But a second marriage would require either Eleanor's death or an annulment, and neither path is without danger. For now, these are only whispered ideas, but they hang in the air like smoke, curling into the corners of every conversation. Godfrey grows quieter, more withdrawn. Some nights he does not speak at all, simply sits before the fire staring into the flames, his cup of wine untouched. Eleanor knows these silences are dangerous. A man who feels cornered will do reckless things, and in the medieval world, recklessness can become policy overnight. Then comes a letter from Eleanor's father, Sir Walter of Berwick, written in Latin, sealed with heavy wax. It arrives by courier. On a freezing morning when the sun has barely risen, the letter is filled with flowery words about faith and patience. But beneath the surface it contains a clear warning. The Berwick estate is also suffering, and rumors have reached them that the Northmeres are considering shifting their alliances elsewhere. If that happens, the Berwicks will retaliate not with swords, perhaps, but with legal claims, accusations, and whispered scandal. Eleanor reads the letter in private, her hands trembling, knowing that she is now a pawn balanced between two collapsing towers, neither stable, both using her as leverage. She cannot refuse their demands, cannot run, cannot even voice her fears aloud. Her role is to smile, to host dinners, to attend mass, to sit at the high table as if everything is well. But each day feels like walking a narrow beam over a pit of knives. The winter feast of Candlemas arrives a day meant for purification, light, and hope. But in Northmere the ceremony is hollow. The sick are too weak to attend Mass, and the feast that follows is sparse, more symbolic than satisfying. Eleanor lights the candles in the chapel herself, praying silently, her lips moving over the familiar words but her mind elsewhere. Wonders if the danger will ever pass, if spring will bring relief, or if this is simply the way life will always be now, constant negotiation with fear, cloaked in ritual and ceremony. Outside the manor, the peasants gather around their spores, telling stories of old winters, of other lords who fell from power, of weddings that brought ruin instead of peace, quit. They know that what happens in the great house affects them directly. If Northmere fails, they will suffer first in the days that follow. The household receives news from afar. A neighboring baron has died suddenly. Poisoned, some say, though others claim it was a hunting accident. His lands are now disputed. His widow caught in the same trap Eleanor finds herself in, negotiating with men who see her body as property, her womb as a political resource. The story is a familiar one, repeated endlessly in noble households across Europe. Weddings, inheritances, alliances, they are all part of the same game, and the players rarely survive unscathed. Eleanor writes another letter to her mother, this time with no polite flourishes. She writes simply, "How do I endure this without becoming someone else?" Her mother's reply, weeks later, is even simpler. "You do not endure, child. You transform." And soar as the snow continues to fall, as the wolves prowl closer to the manor walls, as the political debts tighten like knots in cold rope, Eleanor sits quietly by her window, watching the world freeze around her. She knows now that the real danger of a medieval wedding is not the feast, not the bedding ceremony, not even the threat of poison or duel. The danger is what comes after the slow suffocation of obligation, the silent erosion of freedom, the endless cycle of alliances that trap people in roles they cannot escape. The wedding was just the spark. The real fire is still burning, quietly, beneath the stone floors of Northmere, and it will smolder for years. As you listen, perhaps with your eyes closed, imagine that cold air, the flicker of candlelight on stone walls, the distant sound of wolves, the tightening of belts against hunger, the sharp inhale of a bride who knows too much but cannot speak. Medieval weddings were not ends, they were beginnings of long, quiet battles. And our story, like Eleanor's winter, is far from over. Stay with me, because the hidden history of danger and marriage has many more layers to reveal. The winter finally begins to loosen its grip on Northmere, but the thaw brings no relief on the new forms of danger disguised as renewal. The frozen ground softens into mud, the snowmelt flooding the manor's lower storage rooms, spoiling sacks of grain, warping wooden floors, and drowning the roots of the barley crops just beginning to stir beneath the earth. In the villages, beyond the manor walls, disease takes on new shapes. What began as winter fevers becomes spring ague, the rivers now carrying rot instead of ice. And the thin-faced peasants cough in doorways, their cracked lips whispering that perhaps the marriage of Eleanor and Godfrey was an affront to nature itself. The old women in the villages gather herbs and mutter prayers, not from the Bible, but from older times' names of forest spirits. Charms against bride's misfortune. It is said, in quiet corners of the countryside, that when a marriage begins, with imbalance when the bride is unwilling, when the feast is soaked in blood, when the vows are spoken out of fear, then the land itself will rebel. Superstition hangs heavier than mist, and even the manor steward, a practical man with ink-stained fingers, refuses to enter the northern granary now that 2 servants have died after working there. He claims the grain has turned, that it carries the breath of death, and orders it locked away, though in truth the family cannot afford to lose another sack. Eleanor watches all of this unfold, her face calm, her voice steady when she meets with the steward, but inside her chest something hollow gnaws, like a moth chewing silently through cloth in the dark dot. By now, the political pressure has grown unbearable, and letters arrive from distant relatives, each bearing veiled threats wrapped in polite phrases. Her father writes again, reminding her that her duty is not only to bear children, but to manage the Northmere estate with grace. to smooth the wrinkles of tension between households, a phrase that sounds soft but means, in reality, to manipulate alliances, to soothe tempers, to prevent rebellion through charm and cunning. Yet Eleanor knows that no amount of smiling will repair the damage already done. The debts from the wedding feast have compounded with new expenses, repairs from winter flooding, hiring new servants to replace the dead or fled, paying extra tithes to the church in the hope of divine mercy. Godfrey has begun to sell off portions of his forest rights to distant cousins, permitting them to hunt and fell timber in lands once tightly controlled. This weakens the estate further, but there is no choice. Each contract is another thread pulled from the fabric of Northmere's power, unraveling the manors, reach piece by piece. And now, whispers drift back to the manor from neighboring estates. Baldwin of Locksley has been seen riding south, visiting other lords, carrying with him stories of Godfrey's ill luck and Eleanor's inability to fulfill her role. The implication is clear to anyone listening. Baldwin is positioning himself for power, spreading the idea that he should have married Eleanor instead, that the wedding was a mistake that can still be corrected. Perhaps through annulment, perhaps through blood, in the privacy of her chamber. Eleanor receives a secret letter not from her father this time, but from a distant cousin, Margaret of Carrow, who writes in the cipher they shared as children. The letter warns her directly. Baldwin has been offered support from at least 2 minor lords, both eager to see the Northmere holdings broken apart so they might snatch pieces for themselves. The political game is shifting, and Eleanor is trapped in the center of it. She knows that in medieval law, marriages can be annulled for many reasons: consanguinity, non-consummation, heresy, or simple political convenience if the church can be bribed enough. If Baldwin succeeds in persuading the right clerics, he could unravel the union entirely. Worse still, the church's courts, influenced by rival nobles, sometimes ruled that a bride was cursed, possessed, or otherwise unfit, not just annulled, but imprisoned, or sent to a convent to live out her days in isolation. Eleanor remembers stories of women buried alive in walled chambers in old monasteries, their crimes unspoken, their weddings erased from history by silence and stone. She presses the letter from Margaret to her chest and breathes slowly, knowing, Kit, that this warning is not hysteria, is the cold reality of life among the nobility on the great hall. The servants prepare for Easter, scrubbing the stone floors with vinegar, hanging new rushes mixed with herbs to disguise the smell of damp and illness. The feast will be smaller than usual, but it must be held. In medieval society, the calendar, tick of the church, controls daily life, and failure to observe the holy days properly is seen as a sign of rebellion or heresy. Godfrey orders the musicians to practice, though half of them are sick, and commands the kitchen to slaughter the manor's last remaining goose for the Easter meal. The sacrifice is both symbolic and necessary. Food is scarce, but appearances, stew, must be maintained. Guests will arrive expecting hospitality, and to serve them poorly would be to admit defeat. In the medieval mind, weakness at the table translates directly to weakness in politics. To run out of food, to let a hole fall into this disorder, to allow candles to gutter out without replacement. These are signs of a lord's failing, not just personally, but cosmically. Eleanor plays her part flawlessly. She smiles during the feast, praises the meager portions as if they were grand, and listens to the guests' carefully worded boasts and insults. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her mind races through possible strategists. Who among these lords can be trusted? Who might be bribed? Which maid can be sent as a spy to overhear Baldwin's next move? The Easter Mass is held in the cold, dark chapel, the air thick with incense, the priest's voice hoarse from days of prayer over the sick. Eleanor kneels beside her husband, her head bowed, but she listens closely to the priest's sermon. noting the subtle warnings about sin, about pride, about the dangers of false alliances. These are not just religious platitudes, they are political messages, coded sermons that remind the powerful families present of their duties and dangers. The medieval church is not neutral. It is woven into the political machinery of the time, and priests often act as messengers for rival factions. A single phrase from a sermon can shift alliances, spark fears of excommunication, or signal support for a rebellion. Eleanor knows this well. Her mother taught her to listen between the lines, to catch the unspoken words hidden beneath the chant. As the Mass ends, she rises slowly, her knees stiff from the cold, but her mind sharper than ever. In the days following Easter, the household receives another visitor, an envoy from the bishop's court, bearing documents to review the marriage contracts between the Barracks and Northmeres. Officially, this is a routine matter, but everyone knows it is not. The envoy asks subtle questions about the dowry, about the wording of the vows, about the presence of witnesses at the wedding ceremony. These questions are traps, and Eleanor answers them carefully, knowing that any inconsistency could be used against her. She watches Godfrey sweat through the interview, his hands shaking slightly, his answers stumbling. The envoy notes each hesitation, each pause. And Eleanor knows that somewhere in the bishop's chambers a file is growing, one that could be used to annul the marriage if the political winds shift just slightly further. Annulment would mean disgrace for her family, potential exile for her, and the redistribution of land that could destabilize the entire region. Yet she must continue, to act as if none of this is happening. She must oversee the planting of the spring fields, manage the accounts, smile at guests, and hold the hand of a husband who may soon be forced to choose between defending her or sacrificing her to save himself. Outside the manor, the world moves on, but in ways that only deepen the sense of instability. News arrives from the royal court. A neighboring baron has been accused of treason, his lands seized by the crown. Another noble family has been implicated in a scandal involving false relics sold to a monastery, a scheme that has angered both the church and the king. In this world, scandal is currency, and no one is immune. Eleanor knows that her family could be next, not because of actual crime, but because political opportunity often disguises itself as moral outrage. All it would take is one more rumor, one more accusation, and her life could change again, as swiftly and mercilessly as it did on the day she was wed. And so, as you lie quietly, letting this story unfold in the stillness of your own room, imagine the manor of Northmere cloaked in spring fog, its towers rising from the wet earth like ancient bones. Inside, the candles burn low, the servants whisper, and the lords and ladies continue their careful dance of survival. Medieval weddings were never simple unions, they were traps, rituals of risk, and preludes to long games of power that often lasted decades. The feast may have ended months ago, but the dangers it set in motion are only now reaching their sharpest points. Stay with me, because the story of marriage, danger, and quiet political war still has many more layers to reveal. The rains of early spring bring a false sense of renewal to Northmere, but beneath the greening fields and budding hedgerows, the dangers seeded by Eleanor's wedding continue to grow, invisible roots twisting beneath the surface of daily life. The manor's walls, once hung with wedding banners, now drip with damp, and the rushes on the floor rot faster than they can be replaced. Every corner of the household carries the residue of the wedding, not as memory but as a lingering threat that refuses to dissolve. Coiled around every decision, every glance, spitzy every meal. In the weeks after Easter, the manor becomes a place of careful silences. The cooks no longer sing as they work. The servants move quietly, eyes down, mouths closed. Everyone knows that something is shifting, though no one can name it aloud. The political traps set during the marriage negotiations are now tightening, and Eleanor feels the ropes closing around her wrists in ways both literal and unseen. She cannot sleep through the night without waking to thoughts of Baldwin's rumors, of the bishop's envoys, of the parchment records that sit in locked chests in the chapel records that could be used to either defend or destroy her marriage, debt, depending on who holds the keys. She has learned, in these months since her wedding, that power is not always about swords or land or armies. It is about information, and right now, too many men in too many towers are writing her life into margins. She cannot read. Her husband, Godfrey, grows more brittle with each passing day, worn thin by the weight of expectation and failure. His uncle continues to circle him like a hawk over a dying rabbit, offering advice that sounds like support but feels like control. Godfrey's health deteriorates, his eyes ringed with shadow, his temper short, his hands sometimes trembling. When he reaches for his cup, he drinks more now, though he pretends not to. Eleanor watches the patterns of his decline, the way he avoids looking at her, the way he practices his sword work too long, punishing his own body for failings he cannot to articulate. In private, he sometimes mutters about escape, about leaving the manor for pilgrimage, about walking away from the weight of his title. But in the medieval world, a nobleman cannot simply leave his role behind. His body is political property. His marriage is a contract inked in more than words. If he vanishes, his lands will be carved apart by relatives. His wife will be either seized or annulled, and his name will rot faster than the salted pork in the manor's failing cellars. Eleanor knows this, and she suspects Godfrey knows it too. His fantasies of escape are not plans, they are the desperate whispers of a man trapped by his own inheritance. Beyond the manor walls, the tenants and villagers begin to stir, murmuring quietly about the debts they cannot pay, about the harvests they fear will fail. The Northmere estates were supposed to be stabilized by the marriage to the Birricks, but instead the union has become a symbol of imbalance, a knot of social tension pulling tighter. Taxes have been raised to cover the debts of the wedding, and the peasants know it. Their children go hungry while nobles negotiate over titles and borders. In the fields, the villagers plant barley with hands cracked from cold and work, but they do so while muttering to each other that this marriage has brought them nothing but ruin. They remember the feast not as a celebration, but as the day they lost a portion of their freedom, chained invisibly to the politics of two families that see them as little more than background labor. There is no revolt yet, but the conditions are set. In the medieval world, peasant uprisings do not begin with swords, but with silent looks exchanged over plowshares, with quiet refusals to obey, with late deliveries of grain, with tools mysteriously disappearing from the manors, stores dug inside the manor. Eleanor turns her attention to building her own quiet network of power, not with armies, but with knowledge. She speaks gently to the steward's wife, to the laundress, to the stable boy who overhears the guard's mutterings. She gathers fragments of information, who favors Baldwin, who is loyal to her father, who watches her too closely when she moves through the hall. She learns that the chaplain keeps a second set of records, hidden behind the chapel altar, and that the bishop's envoy has been meeting secretly with Baldwin's men in the village tavern. She learns that one of the scribes who copied her marriage contract is related to a rival family, and that the midwife who tends her is rumored to have been paid by Baldwin's aunt to report back on her health. Every woman in a noble house must become a spy, but Eleanor is becoming something sharper than that. She is transforming into the kind of figure the chronicles will not write about, the quiet architect of her family's survival, moving in the shadows, rewriting fate with whispers and careful hands. Her own health becomes a weapon in this game. She lets the rumors of her possible pregnancy linger, but never confirms them. She knows that in medieval politics, The uncertainty of a child is sometimes more powerful than the reality of one. If she is pregnant, the alliances must hold. If she is not, the annulment discussions gain momentum. By remaining in between, she buys herself time. Time is the rarest currency in this world. A day without conflict, a week without war, a month without betrayal is as valuable as gold. In these stolen moments, she consolidates what little safety she can. She arranges for messages to be sent to her cousin Margaret, to her father's clerk, to the steward of a nearby abbey who owes her mother a favor. These are not grand plans of rebellion or war, but small lifelines woven together. A net she hopes will catch her if the ground beneath Northmere collapses entirely. As spring pushes toward summer, the political landscape darkens further. News arrives from the royal court. The king is ill, and succession rumors swirl. Whenever the throne weakens, the lesser lords turn against each other like wolves testing for the weakest in the pack. Baldwin positions himself more openly now, riding with armed men through the nearby villages, collecting small oaths of loyalty from those who resent the Northmere taxes. Eleanor watches from the manor's high windows as his banners flicker in the wind red and black, sharp as a wound against the pale sky. She knows what this means. A private war is brewing, though no one calls it that yet. In medieval England, wars often begin as personal disputes, marriage quarrels, or land claims, and escalate into full feuds that draw in entire regions. Eleanor's wedding was supposed to prevent this, but instead it has become the tinder that will ignite it. Godfrey grows more unstable as Baldwin's power rises. He spends nights in the tower, drinking alone, refusing food. He speaks less and less to Eleanor, except in fits of anger or shame. One night, in the dim candlelight of their private chamber, he tells her that if he dies in a hunting accident, she must claim it was fate, not murder. She understands what he means. He is preparing to vanish, whether by sword or self-inflicted exile is unclear. Eleanor says nothing, but she knows the cost of such a disappearance. If Godfrey dies, Baldwin will move in faster than vultures to battlefield. The bishop will annul her marriage in retrospect, declare her unfit, remove her dowry, and marry her off to someone else for political convenience. She will lose everything she has built in the past months. Her position, her influence, her small web of power. Game in the medieval world. Women do not get second chances, not publicly. Their roles are assigned by marriage, and the only way to survive beyond that is to operate in the quiet, invisible spaces where men rarely look. And so Eleanor does what noble women have done for centuries. She plans for all outcomes at once. She prepares for Godfrey's survival, for his death, for Baldwin's rise, for her own fall into disgrace. She teaches herself to write more fluently in Latin, in case she must manage her own legal defenses. She practices smiling in the mirror, perfecting the look of calm that disarms rivals. She memorizes the family's accounts, so no steward can cheat her if she is widowed. She studies the land charters until she knows the borders better than the knights who patrol them. And at night she dreams not of romance, not of escape, but of control, not to dominate, but to endure. For in the medieval world, endurance is the highest form of rebellion available to a woman trapped by marriage. The spring rains fall harder as May approaches, washing away the remnants of winter, but also eroding the roads, the bridges, the fragile ties that hold the Northmere estate. Cucadera. In the manor chapel, candles burn low, wax dripping like slow rivers down iron holders, puddling at the base of saint statues whose eyes seem blind to human affairs. But Eleanor knows better. She knows that the saints may be silent, but the scribes are not, the clerics are not, the lords and knights are certainly not. The story of her wedding has already been written in their minds, and she cannot control how it will be told. But she can control, for now, the next moves in the game. And so, as you listen quietly, letting this history drift into your thoughts like rain against a window pane, imagine the weight of this life, the soft footsteps in cold corridors, the creak of parchment unrolling, the sting of vinegar on hands scrubbed raw, the distant sound of hooves that may bring messengers or soldiers. Medieval weddings were not endings, they were beginnings of long, dangerous negotiations. And for women like Eleanor, survival was not guaranteed by love or luck, but by patience, cunning, and the ability to smile while standing on the edge of ruin. Stay with me, because this story, core of marriage, risk, and endurance, still has much further to go. The days stretch longer as summer approaches. But in Northmere, the lengthening light only exposes the cracks more clearly. With each dawn, the consequences of Eleanor's marriage become heavier, not lighter, pressing into the manor like damp air through the stone walls. The banners from the wedding feast have long since been packed away, but the debts they represent still gnaw at the estate's ledgers like rats behind the pantry doors. Each morning begins the same. Eleanor sits by the window in the solar, the faint sun on her face, her fingers working small stitches into linen while her mind churns through strategies for survival. The rituals of nobilities, sewing, praying, hosting guests are not leisure. They are masks, coverings for the invisible labor of calculation that fills every moment. By now, Eleanor understands that the wedding was not a single event, but a trapped door into a lifetime of quiet war. The guests who toasted her months ago are now sharpening rumors instead of knives. The knights who pledged loyalty at the feast have shifted allegiances in whispers over wine. Baldwin's visits to neighboring estates have increased, and each time he returns, he smiles more confidently, like a man who knows the tide has turned in his favor. Eleanor knows better than to confront him directly. In medieval politics, the appearance of calm is a weapon more effective than any blade. And so she smiles when he bows in the hall, answers his veiled comments with polite words, and continues. Her build her defenses in silence. The countryside reflects this tension. The fields bloom, but the manor's peasants are stretched thinner than ever, forced to sow new crops while still paying off the tithes extracted after the wedding. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes wary. Peasant revolts in medieval England do not explode overnight, they simmer first, like broth left too long over a fire, and Northmere is reaching that boiling point. The bailiffs report small thefts of grain, tools gone missing, minor acts of rebellion disguised as accidents. A thatched barn burns mysteriously on the edge of the estate, and no one claims responsibility. Eleanor listens to these reports with calm face, but inside she feels the familiar coil of dread tightening in her chest. She knows how these things spiral. A single spark of village anger can ignite into a feud between lords, and violence in the countryside often pulls noble families into ruin faster than war between armies. Her father wrote to her just last week, warning of unrest in his own lands. The Birrick estates, once stable, are now stretched by their own debts, by neighboring rivals eager to test weakness. He reminds her that her position at Northmere is not just personal but political. If she fails here, the consequences will ripple outward, threatening her entire bloodline. Inside the manor, Godfrey becomes more absent from daily life. His health worsens. His appetite fades. He disappears for days at a time into the woods, claiming to hunt but often returning without game. His cloak muddy, his eyes distant. His uncle, seizing the opportunity, begins managing the estate, more directly replacing stewards, signing contracts, collecting oaths of loyalty without consulting his nephew. Eleanor watches this quietly, but she memorizes each change, each name added to the manor rolls, each coin transferred between hands. Her maids whisper that Godfrey has taken to visiting a hermit in the hills beyond the estate a man known for. mixing herbs, for brewing poisons as easily as cures. Whether Godfrey seeks death for himself or for someone else is unclear, but Eleanor knows it will not end well. In medieval courts, a nobleman who withdraws from public life is seen as either weak or dangerous, both fatal reputations for a lord to carry. Rumors of madness or melancholy are not dismissed as mere gossip. They are used as legal pretexts for deposition, for annulment, or for orchestrated accidents that leave widows and vacant titles. Eleanor keeps her network of informants alive, her threads of quiet influence weaving tighter. She sends small gifts to the steward's daughter, a carved comb, a ribbon ensuring the girl continues to report back about the night's conversations in the courtyard. She speaks softly to the chaplain, offering more generous donations for the chapel candles in exchange for knowing which priests have been speaking with Baldwin. She learns that Baldwin has promised his supporters that by autumn the political situation will shift, whether by accident, by church decree, or by more direct means. There is talk of a hunting trip planned for late summer, a traditional gathering that could easily mask an ambush. Eleanor does not confront these whispers head-on. Instead, she adjusts her strategies. She arranges for her own letters to be sent south to a cousin in London who works in the Chancery Courts, asking for updates on which clerics have been bribed, which papal dispensations have been requested. In the medieval world, political maneuvering is done not only with swords but with parchment and wax seals, and she is determined to be one step ahead. Meanwhile, the manor continues its outward performances of normalcy. Summer brings visitors, minor lords with their wives, priests from nearby abbeys, merchants seeking permission to trade. Each visit is a test. Eleanor hosts the feasts herself now, as Godfrey withdraws further into his private chambers. She manages the seating arrangements, ensuring that rival guests are not placed too close together, that no knight with a known grudge has direct access to the high table. She watches the conversations closely, noting who laughs too loudly, who avoids eye contact, who repeats Baldwin's phrases as if they were their own. These are not mere social calls. They are probing missions disguised as hospitality, and Eleanor treats them as such. She learns to detect the subtle shifts in loyalty. The way a guest's tone changes when speaking of future harvests or military campaigns. Every word is a clue, and she stores each one away for the dangerous months ahead. At night, when the manor grows still, she walks the halls in silence, her footsteps soft on the stone, her ears tuned to every creak of the wood, every whisper. From behind half-closed doors, she hears the servants talking about the marriage, speculating on how long the union will last, on whether Baldwin will replace Godfrey before winter. Some say Eleanor will be sent to a convent if the alliance fails. Others claim she will be remarried to a southern lord who needs a young wife to secure his claims. These rumors do not wound her anymore. They are simply part of the air she breathes, an hour, constant reminder that in this world a woman's fate is never hers to hold, not openly, but in the secret spaces, in the quiet corners of power. She can still maneuver, still control small pieces of the game. Her body remains a political subject, perhaps the most dangerous piece of all. The question of whether she carries an heir hangs over her like mist, thickening with each passing week. She allows the ambiguity to remain, refusing to confirm or deny the whispers. This is strategy, not indecision. Uncertainty keeps enemies frozen, unsure of when or how to act. A confirmed pregnancy might protect her temporarily, but it would also increase the danger, as factions might move to control the future heir or to ensure the child does not survive. No pregnancy leaves the marriage vulnerable to annulment, but it also preserves certain alliances that would otherwise collapse. Eleanor has learned that in medieval life, Sometimes the best way to hold power is to create a pause so heavy it traps your rivals in inaction. So she waits, balancing on the knife edge of possibility, playing both sides against each other without ever revealing her hand. Summer festivals approach, bringing with them new risks. The midsummer fires, meant to ward off evil spirits, are also opportunities for political gatherings under the guise of celebration. Peasants dance around the flames, but the nobles gather at the edges, whispering in the torchlight about harvests, marriages, and war. Eleanor attends the fires, her face lit by the flickering glow, her hands cool against the warmth. She listens as Baldwin's supporters speak of hunts planned for late August, of trade deals with lords farther south, of favors exchanged behind closed doors. She notes who shares wine with whom, who lingers too long in conversation, who leaves surly to meet in private. These are not just festivals. They are political summits in disguise. And Eleanor treats them as battlefields where the weapons are words and smiles, not blades. The tension in the manor continues to mount. The steward reports that grain stores are lower than expected, that tithes to the church have increased beyond reason, that Baldwin's men are pressing tenants for small oaths of loyalty. Godfrey, isolated in his chambers, refuses to confront any of this directly. Eleanor knows he is breaking, but she cannot stop it not without exposing her own plans too soon. Instead, she prepares for the likely outcomes, a duel arranged to remove Godfrey, an annulment processed through the bishop's court, or perhaps a sudden accident during the summer hunts. She arranges her own escape routes quietly, ensuring that if the worst happens, she has enough silver hidden in the manor coffers to bribe a passage south, enough favors owed to her to find refuge in a sympathetic household. But more than anything, she prepares for the possibility that she will have to stay, that she will be forced to remain at Northmere, at the center of the storm, weaving the threads of survival until the political landscape shifts again. As you listen now, perhaps resting quietly in your own room, consider the weight of these quiet months, the careful negotiations, the unspoken threats, the smiles masking knives. Medieval weddings do not end when the feast is over. They begin a long and dangerous season of endurance, where every word, every gesture, every silence can mean life or death. Eleanor's story, like the stories of countless women hidden in the margins of chronicles, is not about love or ceremony, but about the art of surviving in a world built to erase you. Stay with me, Deke, because the threads of this history still have many knots left to untangle. Part 14. The heat of late summer presses against Northmere like a damp, invisible hand, thickening the air, slowing breath, and forcing every creature, man and animal, alike into uneasy stillness. Yet beneath this heavy quiet, the danger seeded by Eleanor's wedding continues to coil, tightening in secret places, ready to strike when the time is right. The fields outside the manor shimmer with gold, but the harvest will not save the estate this year. The debts from the marriage still gnaw at the ledgers. The peasants mutter about taxes that rise like floodwaters, and the merchants who once traded freely with Northmere now hesitate, afraid of Baldwin's growing shadow. Inside the manor, the windows are thrown open to let in any breeze, but the halls smell of sweat, spoiled Russias, and fear. The servants move cautiously, knowing that in times of political tension, the smallest mistake can become an accusation, and an accusation can become a death sentence. In the medieval world, fear is not an occasional visitor, is part of the architecture, as present as the stone walls, the iron locks, and the cold weight of the marriage contracts stored in the manor's chapel. Eleanor rises each morning, before the sun, her body stiff from restless sleep, her mind already rehearsing the day's moves before she steps out of bed. She knows now, fully, that her wedding was not an entry into partnership, but an entry into a game of survival where no one will save her if she fails, not the church, not her father, not her husband, and certainly not Baldwin. Godfrey's decline accelerates as the heat rises. He eats little, drinks too much, and spends hours pacing the tower that overlooks the manor grounds. His hands clasped behind his back, his lips moving in whispered monologues that Eleanor sometimes hears through the stone walls but cannot fully understand. His uncle has all but taken control of the estate now, signing documents with Godfrey's seal, arranging meetings with Baldwin's men under the pretense of resolving land disputes. Eleanor knows these are not negotiations, they are positioning, moves, subtle tests of loyalty designed to see who will support Baldwin when the final shift of power comes. Some of the household knights have already made their choice. Eleanor watches them in the hall, notes who bows less deeply to Godfrey than they did before, who lingers too long in conversation with Baldwin's retainers. She says nothing, but each gesture is catalogued in her mind. In medieval politics, silence is not submission, it is strategy, and Eleanor has learned the art of waiting better than anyone in Northmere. Her body remains at the center of the crisis. The question of an heir still hangs unanswered, like a hawk circling over a wounded rabbit. Some days she feels the signs of pregnancy, a missed course, a tightening in her belly, but whether these are real or imagined, she cannot be sure. In truth, she fears both outcomes. If she carries a child, she becomes a political vessel, her every breath monitored by rivals eager to control the future of Northmere's bloodline. If she remains barren, she becomes disposably a pawn to be removed from the board by annulment, or worse. There is no safe answer, and so she keeps the uncertainty alive, feeding it to both sides like grain to nervous horses. She confides only in the midwife, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper silence, who reports to no one but Eleanor herself. Together they maintain the charade, knowing that in medieval politics, ambiguity is sometimes the last shield left to a woman caught between alliances. The hunting trip that Baldwin has long hinted at is finally announced, set for the waning days, of August, when the air will be thick with dust and the forests dry as parchment. Hunting is not just a pastime for nobles, it is a political ritual, a place where deals are made, where rivalries are tested beneath the mask of sport. Accidents happen during hunts with unsettling frequency, and Eleanor knows this well. Boars turn unexpectedly, horses stumble, arrows go astray. But in the medieval world, these accidents are rarely accidental. A broken neck from a fall can solve a political problem neatly, leaving no blood feud to avenge, no war to start, just quiet grief and a shift in property titles. Eleanor prepares for the hunt with the same precision she used to prepare for her wedding months ago. She arranges the supplies, oversees the packing of gear, selects the servants who will attend, not just for their skills, but for their loyalty. Every rider, every falconer, every stable boy is chosen carefully, because in times like these, even the man who holds your stirrup could be part of a plot. On the morning of the hunt, the manor wakes before dawn. The air is heavy with mist, the kind that clings to the skin and makes armor sweat against the flesh. Eleanor watches from the tower window as the riders gather in the courtyard, their horses stamping nervously, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Baldwin rides at the head of the company, his cloak fluttering slightly behind him, his expression calm but sharp, like a man who knows his role is already secured. Godfrey appears last, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he fastens the clasp of his hunting cape. He looks at Eleanor only once before mounting his horse, and in that glance she sees everything: the fear, the resignation, the small flicker of hope that perhaps today's ride will end the way he expects, perhaps with death, perhaps with freedom. She says nothing, only nods, her face a mask of composure. This is how noble marriages survive, not with love, but with silent agreements to endure together or apart, whichever fate requires. The hunt winds through the forest, past old Roman ruins, overgrown with moss, through shadowed glades where the underbrush crackles beneath hoof and boot. Boar spears are held at the ready, but the animals are secondary to the real prey: alliances, rivalries, control. Baldwin rides close to Godfrey, speaking softly, his tone friendly but his eyes hard. Eleanor, riding just behind them, hears fragments of their conversation, words about loyalty, about family, about the future. The veiled threats are clear to anyone who understands this world. Baldwin is offering a choice: step aside or be removed. Godfrey smiles, but it is the thin smile of a man who knows he has no good options left. The hunt continues, dogs baying in the distance, servants trailing behind with packs and provisions. But the real action happens in these whispered exchanges, in these looks exchanged over the necks of horses. No blood is spilled today, not yet, but the decisions made in this forest will shape the fate of Northmere more than any battle ever could. When the hunting party returns, the sun is low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manor fields. No board was taken, but that hardly matters. The political game has moved forward a square, and everyone knows it. That evening the feast is small, the conversation brittle. Godfrey speaks little, his face drawn, his hands resting on the table, as if they no longer belong to him. Baldwin smiles and drinks, his role as future Lord of Northmere, now an open secret. Eleanor sits beside her husband, her face serene, but inside she feels the shift in the air, the subtle click of fate moving one notch further into place. This is how power changes hands in medieval England, not always with war, but with dinners, with hunts, with silences that everyone agrees to maintain. The days after the hunt pass quietly, but beneath the surface the preparations for transition begin. The bishop's men arrive again, this time to discuss estate matters under the guise of offering spiritual guidance. They ask more questions about the wedding contract, about Godfrey's health, about the management of the lands. Eleanor answers carefully, knowing that every word is recorded somewhere, every hesitation noted. She prepares documents of her own, secret copies of charters, lists of tenants who owe loyalty to her father's side of the family, accounts of debts owed to her dowry estate that she can call in if Baldwin tries to strip her of power after Godfrey's fall. These papers are her weapons now, rolled tightly and hidden in the hollow space beneath the floorboards of her chamber. Next to the coins she has quietly collected for months. In medieval life, knowledge is currency, and parchment can be as deadly as steel. Outside the manor, the summer wanes. The fields grow heavy with grain, the peasants bend under the weight of their work, and the wolves in the distant woods come closer each night, drawn by the scent of livestock and human fear. The harvest will be good this year, but that will not save Northmere from the political storm already underway. Eleanor knows that her marriage has become a symbol, not just for her family, but for the entire region, a sign of how fragile alliances are, how quickly a celebration can become a curse. She knows, too, that no one will remember the wedding itself in the years to come. They will remember the land disputes, the shift in power, the deaths that followed, not the feast, not the flowers, the cinema, not the vows whispered beneath the chapel arches. And so, as you listen now, perhaps breathing more slowly, perhaps letting your eyes close as the night settles around you, imagine the quiet aftermath of a medieval wedding: the cold hearths, deep parchment contracts, the whispered threats in corridors lit only by candlelight. This was not history written by kings or by wars. It was history lived in the small, suffocating spaces between alliances and betrayals, between marriage beds and council chambers. Eleanor's story, like so many others, is a reminder that the most dangerous battles are often fought without swords at all. Stay with me, because there is still more to unravel in this long and quiet war. Part 15. As the last days of summer fade into early autumn, the air around Northmere turns sharper, thinner, as if the very sky has begun to hold its breath. The fields lie heavy with harvested grain, but the manor storerooms remain haunted by shortages food, measured more in anxiety, than abundance, debts counted not in coins but in whispered favors owed to men who have no patience left for politeness. Inside the walls, the political noose that was slipped around Eleanor's neck during her wedding tightens invisibly, knot by knot, in ways no feast hall would ever show. The marriage that was meant to secure peace has instead become a machine of quiet destruction, grinding forward without mercy, fed by contracts, rumors, and the slow decay of trust. Godfrey barely leaves his chamber now. Some days he speaks to no one at all, sending servants away with a glance, staring for hours at the stone walls as though trying to imagine a different life behind them. His body grows thin, his hair graying at the edges, though he is not yet 30. The priests call it melancholy, the physicians prescribe bloodletting, but Eleanor knows the truth. It is not illness that is killing him. It is the impossible weight of failure, of being born into a role no man can escape without paying for it with his mind, his land, or his life. His uncle moves through the manor like a shadow pretending to be flesh, his hand now on every document, his name whispered in every negotiation, and Baldwin waits in the wings, poised to take what remains when the final collapse comes. Eleanor has learned to live in this space between silence and catastrophe. Each day she performs her duties overseeing the household accounts, ordering repairs for the manor walls, ensuring the servants are fed just enough to keep working but not enough to grow complacent. She smiles in the hallways, speaks softly in the chapel, receives guests with grace, but inside her mind she keeps the real ledgers, the invisible accounts of who will betray whom, when, and for what price. In the medieval world, survival is not about strength, it is about reading the wind before it changes direction. And Eleanor has become a master of that art. She knows which guards have already accepted Baldwin's coin, which clerks have copied. 2 versions of the same document, one for the public record, one for secret leverage. She knows which servants still carry loyalty to her father's house, which maids will report her movements to the uncle, and which stable boy will deliver her letters south to the Chancery Court without asking questions. These details are not petty, they are the only armor she has. In a world where noble women are traded like livestock between families, where marriages are weapons, and weddings are traps disguised as celebrations, Eleanor's power lies in the careful curation of knowledge no one else sees dot at night. When the manor quiets and the candles burn low, she walks the corridors alone, her footsteps silent on the cold stone. She runs her fingers along the walls' rough surfaces, thinking of the generations of women who have done the same, wives, daughters, widows, each trapped in similar games, each forced to navigate a world that demands their obedience but punishes them for weakness. She has read the old chronicles, copied in shaky Latin by monks in distant abbeys, and she knows how women are remembered, as footnotes, as mothers of heirs, as causes of wars they did not start. But she refuses to be forgotten. In the same way, her role may be hidden from the scribes, but she carves her mark in the places no ink can reach, in the alliances she builds quietly, in the secrets she holds that could destroy half the region if revealed. This is her rebellion, not loud, but enduring, like ivy climbing a crumbling tower. Slow but unstoppable. Meanwhile, The world beyond Northmere continues to shift. News arrives from the royal court that the king's illness has worsened. Factions gather like crows around a carcass, each noble family positioning itself for the coming storm. In London, clerks in the Chancery forge alliances of parchment, while knights in the borderlands prepare for skirmishes that will be dressed up as tournaments. Every marriage, every inheritance, every forgotten feud is being stirred into motion, and Northmere is no exception. Baldwin has already sent word to powerful men beyond the region, offering promises of loyalty in exchange for recognition as the new lord of the manor. He does not say it aloud, but everyone knows the plan. Godfrey will be declared unfit, either mad or too ill to rule, and the bishop's court will grant Baldwin control of the estate. If Eleanor is lucky, she will be sent to a convent. If she is unlucky, she will be remarried to some southern warlord eager to use her for new alliances. Her dowry redistributed like meat on a feast table. That Eleanor knows this, and she prepares accordingly. She has begun setting aside small caches of silver and gold, hidden in the manor walls, wrapped in cloths to keep from clinking when moved. She has written letters to distant cousins, women married into merchant families who can offer refuge if the political tides turn too fast. She has memorized the routes south, the names of the taverns where messengers can be found, the abbeys that will provide shelter to noblewomen who arrive cloaked in secrecy and gold. But, more than this, she has prepared for the possibility that she may not run at all, that she may stay and fight. Not with swords, but with the quiet weapons of power that women have always used in places like this. Rumor, influence, careful manipulation of religious authorities. She knows the bishop's weaknesses, the confessions he has whispered in moments of drunkenness during long winter feasts. She knows the steward's debts, the priest's secret love affair, the guardsman who has stolen coin from the manor coffers. These are her blades, sharper than steel, and she is ready to use them. Her relationship with Godfrey has changed to where once she feared him, pitied him. Now she sees him as something else, a tragic figure caught in the same web, a man destroyed by the same system that threatens to crush her. They share meals in silence now, no longer pretending to be husband and wife in the traditional sense, but allies of circumstance. Sometimes, late at night, he asks her what she would do if she were in his place. She does not answer directly, but he knows. They have both become something other than what the church said they should be. Their marriage, once a contract of land and blood, is now an alliance of shared survival, built not on love but on the need to endure. As the first winds of autumn rise, bringing cooler air and the scent of wood smoke from distant villages, Baldwin makes his move more openly. He hosts a feast, inviting lords and knights from neighboring estates, framing it as a celebration of the harvest, but using it as a stage for his claim. He speaks of duty, of strength, of the need for stable leadership at Northmere. He does not name Godfrey directly, but the implication is clear. The guests smile, toast politely, but Eleanor watches their eyes. She sees who agrees, who hesitates, who might still be swayed. After the feast, she meets privately with the chaplain, reminding him of the documents she has seen, the ones he thought were burned. She meets with the steward, hinting that she knows about the side deals he has made with Baldwin, that she will forget these sins if he remains loyal. In medieval politics, threats are never made directly. They are delivered as gentle warnings wrapped in silk. The days shorten. The harvest comes in, but the manor remains trapped in its political winter, no matter what the calendar says. Eleanor wakes each morning knowing that the next letter, the next visitor, could be the one that shatters the fragile balance she has maintained. But she also knows that she is no longer the girl who sat silent at the wedding feast months ago. She has become something else, a woman forged not by romance or ceremony, but by necessity, by the endless calculations of survival in a world that sees women as pieces in a larger game. This is the hidden history of medieval marriage, the part the chronicles forget to tell: the long nights, the quiet power, the lives maneuvered in shadows while the scribes write about kings and battles. And so, as you listen quietly now, perhaps settling deeper into your rest, imagine the cold halls of Northmere at dusk, the flicker of candlelight on old stone, the soft rustle of parchment as plans are drawn and secrets written down in careful, hidden hands. The wedding was only the beginning. The real danger, the long, patient, suffocating war of marriage and politics has only just reached its most perilous point. Stay with me, because the quiet battles of this history are still far from over. The winds of autumn tear through the Northmere estate like invisible blades, snapping branches from the orchard trees, rattling shutters loose from their hinges, scattering the last of the harvest husks across the manor courtyard. But inside the walls, the air is even colder, a tension that no fire can warm. The marriage that once glittered with promise Eleanor's union to Godfrey, celebrated with banners, feasts, and songs, has now rotted into a political siege. Each day, Eleanor wakes before dawn to manage not just the household but the carefully layered deceptions that keep her alive. She has learned to smile when she feels nothing, to nod politely at men who plot her removal, to sit through Mass knowing that the priest who blesses her in Latin has already aligned himself with Baldwin's faction. Her existence has become a performance of stability in a house poised for collapse, and she plays her role better than any troubadour could. She oversees the accounts, balancing debts that cannot truly be paid. She walks the manor grounds, inspecting the winter stores, while knowing full well they will not last. She listens to the servants' gossip, noting each new whisper about her supposed infertility, her husband's rumored madness, Baldwin's steady rise. These rumors are not idle, they are weapons. In the medieval world, stories are as sharp as swords, and Eleanor knows that once a narrative takes hold, no amount of truth can dislodge it. Godfrey fades further each day, his presence more ghost than lord. He no longer speaks in the council chambers, no longer joins the hunts, no longer reads the letters that pile on his writing desk. His hair has thinned, his skin gone pale and blotchy. Some days he refuses food, other days he drinks until his speech slurs and his eyes roll back, leaving Eleanor to cover for him, to host the guests, to manage the estate in all but name. She no longer pretends to be his wife in the old sense. Now she is his warden, his nurse, and sometimes his shield. In rare moments of clarity, he whispers to her that he knows what's coming, that Baldwin will not wait much longer, that his uncle has already begun drawing up the documents that will declare him incapable of ruling. Godfrey jokes darkly about taking vows and joining a monastery, but they both know the church will not save him. Monks can retreat to cloisters. Lords cannot retreat from feudal obligations, and Eleanor cannot retreat either. Her body remains at the center of the estate's future, a political vessel waiting to be claimed, repurposed, or discarded depending on how the winds shift. Outside the manor, the peasants brace for a hard winter. The harvest was good, but the levies were higher. Food is stockpiled for the lords first, leaving the villages to scrape together what little remains. Eleanor knows this too. She has walked the fields at dawn, watched the smoke rise from crumbling cottages, listened to the low conversations of men too hungry to remain obedient for much longer. Peasant revolts often begin not with swords but with silence, with harvests hoarded in secret, with work refused quietly, with small tools broken accidentally to delay obligations. Here in the hall, the bailiffs report minor thefts from the manor stores, animals gone missing, bread stolen from the bakehouse. These are warnings, not yet riots, but they add to the weight pressing against Eleanor's chest. She knows that if the manor's political crisis explodes into violence, the villagers will side with whoever promises them relief. Baldwin's men are already spreading promises of lighter taxes, of fairer rule, and Eleanor knows that once Baldwin controls the estate, he will do the same as every other lord, raise the levies higher to pay for the very coup he has orchestrated. But promises, not facts, are what fuel loyalty, and Eleanor has no illusions about the loyalty of peasants in times like these. The bishop's men return to the manor in mid-autumn, bringing with them sealed parchments and tight-lipped expressions. They claim to be conducting routine inquiries, but everyone knows the truth. They are here to finalize the paperwork that will declare Godfrey unfit. Eleanor meets them in the great hall, dressed in deep blue velvet, her hair pinned carefully, her face composed. She answers their questions with precision, neither confirming nor denying the rumors of her husband's decline. She reminds them of the marriage contracts, of her dowry's legal protections, of the lands that would fall into dispute if the annulment proceeds too quickly. She drops subtle mentions of debts the bishop himself owes to her father's allies, care of letters she might send to the chancery courts in London if pressed too hard. This is not a negotiation, it is a chess game, and Eleanor plays it with the same steady hand she uses to thread her needle each night by candlelight. She has learned that in this world, patience is deadlier than confrontation that night. She writes letters in secret, her script tight and elegant, designed for speed and discretion. One letter goes to her cousin Margaret, warning her to prepare for a possible flight south. Another goes to the prior of a monastery who once confessed to Eleanor his fear of Baldwin's ambitions. She reminds him, gently, that silence can be purchased, but so can betrayal. A third letter goes to the steward of her father's estate, requesting an updated list of who owes favors to the Berwick family and who might shift sides if Baldwin rises. These letters are folded, sealed with wax, and hidden beneath a loose stone in the manor floor until the right courier can be trusted. Words in ink are sometimes sharper than blades, and Eleanor writes them as if they are weapons, each sentence another notch in her quiet defense. Meanwhile, Baldwin consolidates his support openly now, no longer pretending to serve Godfrey, but acting as lord in all but title. He controls the manor's guards, holds private meetings in the solar, and walks the hallways with the ease of a man who knows he will not be challenged. Eleanor watches him carefully, noting his every move, studying his habits the way a hunter studies the path of a deer before the kill. She knows that confronting him directly would be suicide. Instead, she prepares for the long game, setting traps not of violence but of reputation and consequence. She arranges for rumors to be spread quietly by trusted servants that Baldwin has overreached, that his alliances are brittle, that the church may reconsider his petitions if new information comes to light. She feeds these whispers into the ears of those who matter, letting doubt bloom like mold in the dark. Her body continues to betray her in small ways: fatigue, sleeplessness, a stomach twisted by constant anxiety, but she shows none of it in public. She maintains the ritual of the household, attending prayers, hosting meals, overseeing the manor's accounts, all while knowing that at any moment the bishop's court could rule against her. If they declare the marriage invalid, she could lose everything: her position, her property rights, her future. But she has built her web carefully, and she knows that even if Baldwin succeeds, she has planted enough poison seeds in his path. Medieval politics are not about winning, they are about surviving longer than your rivals. And Eleanor intends to do just that. Godfrey speaks less and less. On some nights he calls for Eleanor, his voice thin and rasping. He asks her if she will remember him kindly when he is gone. She tells him yes, though they both know it is a lie. They share these quiet moments, not as husband and wife, but as two people trapped by a system larger than either of them, bound by vows that have become chains. She brushes his hair back from his forehead, holds his hand until he sleeps, then returns to her chamber to plot the next day's survival. There is no room for sentiment in this house any more, only calculation. Only endurance dot outside the manor. The first frost of winter settles over the land, coating the fields in a pale shimmer that looks beautiful from a distance but means death for late crops. The peasants wrap themselves in cloaks patched with old fabric, muttering prayers to saints who rarely intervene in the affairs of the poor. The wolves grow bolder, coming closer to the village each night, their eyes gleaming at the edge of torchlight. The guards grumble, the steward tightens the accounts, and the scribes continue to copy documents that will be used to rewrite the history of Northmere once the final decision comes. Eleanor knows that the scribes will not write about her sleepless nights, her secret letters, or her quiet negotiations. They will record land transfers, titles, dowries, perhaps a note about Godfrey's incapacity. But her role will be reduced to a line about a politically unfortunate union. Kid. Yet she also knows that the unwritten history, the hidden story, belongs to her, and to women like her who survived not through conquest but through quiet, unseen mastery of the spaces between power. As you listen now, perhaps feeling the weight of the day fall away, imagine the cold stone corridors of Northmere, the soft creak of leather shoes on old floors, the crackle of parchment beneath careful fingers. Imagine the long breath of history moving through these halls, carrying not the echoes of battles, but the silent endurance of those who lived in the shadows of them. Eleanor's wedding was not the climax of her life. It was the first trap in a long, slow game of survival, and the danger is still far from over. Stay with me, because the quiet struggles of this story still have more turns to take. The first strew snows of winter arrive quietly at Northmere, falling in the night without warning, cloaking the manor and its surrounding fields in a heavy silence that feels at once serene and suffocating. In the early morning the courtyard is still, save for the slow breath of horses in the stables and the distant crack of ice forming on the surface of the manor pond. But inside the great hall, the quiet is deceptive. The machinery of political survival grinds on, unseen but relentless, as Eleanor rises from her bed, her body stiff from another night of shallow sleep. She stands at the window of her chamber, looking out over the snow-covered rooftops, knowing that the world beyond this estate is just as frozen in uncertainty. The bishop's decision regarding the annulment of her marriage looms closer with each day, the cleric's whispered inquiries tightening like a noose. Every visitor who arrives at Northmere now carries with them a potential verdict, a letter sealed in wax, a message from the chancery, a subtle nod that could mean either survival or ruin. Eleanor has learned not to flinch at these possibilities. Instead, she moves through her days with a deliberate calm, her steps measured, her words chosen as carefully as if she were walking a rope over a frozen lake. Godfrey no longer joins her for meals. His health has declined to the point where he refuses all but the smallest amounts of food, his body wasting away under furs and blankets in the cold tower chamber where he isolates himself. His uncle, seizing full control of the estate's daily affairs, has begun drafting documents that would make Baldwin the de facto lord of Northmere in everything but name. Eleanor watches this happen with the eyes of a chess player, understanding that her role is no longer that of a bride or a lady of the house, but something sharper, colder, the last line of defense against complete erasure. She does not confront Baldwin directly. That would be suicide. Instead, she continues her campaign of silent resistance, leveraging the few tools left to her, whispers, alliances, and the careful management of rumor. She arranges 4 small stories to circulate tales of Baldwin's greed, of his overreach, of his dealings with mercenaries from the south who have no loyalty to the local villages. These rumors are planted in the ears of visiting merchants, in the kitchens where servants exchange gossip, in the chapel where even priests are susceptible to fear. In a medieval world where news travels by word of mouth, control of the narrative is as powerful as control of the sword. The midwinter feast approaches, but the mood in the manor is not festive. The servants prepare what they can from dwindling supplies, roasting thin game birds and boiling root vegetables from the last of the harvest stores. Eleanor oversees the preparations, ensuring that appearances are maintained, for in this world, to fail at hospitality is to admit weakness. Yet, she knows the truth. The feast is a formality, a hollow gesture meant to distract from the estate's political decay. Guests will arrive out of obligation, not celebration. They will bring polite smiles and sharp knives, testing the waters of Baldwin's rising influence while pretending to honor Godfrey and Eleanor's marriage. Eleanor plans every detail of the feast, from the placement of the benches to the order of the courses, knowing that seating arrangements can be as dangerous as battlefield formations. She places Baldwin at the high table, but not at the center. She seats rival knights near each other, forcing them into careful conversation, hoping their mutual distrust will delay any unified front against her. She orders the wine to be poured generously, knowing that loose tongues can offer more insight than any spy. On the night of the feast, the manor fills with the murmur of voices, the clatter of cups, the low hum of musicians playing quietly in the corner of the hall. Eleanor sits beside an empty chair Godfrey's chair and smiles as though this absence is merely an illness, not the symbol of political collapse that it has become. Baldwin plays his role perfectly, laughing at the right moments, praising the harvest, offering toasts to unity, but Eleanor sees the calculation behind his eyes. He knows the feast is not about food, but about testing allegiances. Who stands when he speaks? Who looks away? Who drinks more heavily than usual, signaling discomfort? She watches the subtle movements of the hall the way a falcon watches the ground for mice, storing every detail for later use. In medieval politics, the most important events happen between the lines, in the silences between toasts, that as the evening wears on. Baldwin announces that he will sponsor a tournament in the spring, a clear signal that he intends to solidify his control before the next season's planting. Tournaments, in this era, are not merely sport. They are military displays disguised as entertainment. Opportunities for lords to gather armed men without the appearance of rebellion. Eleanor understands immediately what this means. Baldwin will use the tournament to draw knights from neighboring estates, binding them to his side with favors, promises of land, perhaps even marriages. She smiles at the announcement, nodding politely, but her mind races. She will need to act before spring, or she will lose her last chance to shape the outcome of this dangerous game. After the feast, when the guests have retired to their chambers, or staggered into the cold to find their horses, Eleanor meets with the steward in private. She demands a list of every family in the region who has unresolved debts to Northmere, web of obligation she can still use if she moves carefully. She plans to call in these debts quietly, forcing the lesser nobles to make a choice: support Baldwin and risk exposure, or support her and gain a temporary reprieve. She also sends word to her father's estate, requesting a meeting with his legal advisers to draft new documents that can muddy the legal waters. Further counterclaims, petitions, disputes over dowry clauses that will delay the bishop's decision for months if necessary. Delay is her ally now. Every day that passes without an official annulment is another day she can gather resources, shift loyalties, and prepare for the next blow. Meanwhile, in the villages, the unrest grows. The peasants are hungry, cold, and angry. Eleanor sends small parcels of food to certain families, not enough to relieve the hunger, but enough to ensure their loyalty. She knows that if rebellion comes, She will need allies among the lower classes, not just the knights and clerics. In times of crisis, the lines between noble and commoner blur, and she intends to survive no matter which way the winds of power shift. Godfrey, in his tower, has become a shell of the man he once was. Some nights he calls for Eleanor, asking her to sit with him as he stares into the hearth, his eyes unfocused, his hands trembling. He tells her stories of his childhood, of days spent hawking and riding before the burdens of lordship hollowed him out. He asks if she will remember him kindly when he is gone, and she says yes, though they both know memory has no kindness left in it. Their marriage, once a transaction of land and title, has become a shared sentence of political captivity. Two people caught in a system that cares nothing for personal sorrow. Eleanor sometimes dreams of escapove riding south under the cover of darkness, of finding refuge in a convent or with distant cousins in London. But she knows the reality of that choice. Exile is not freedom, not for a woman of her standing. Her name would follow her, her dowry would be seized, and her body would still be politicized, no matter where she fled. So she remains, playing the game that has no rules except survival. Each day, she carves out a little more space for herself, planting small seeds of resistance that may or may not bloom come spring. She writes letters in cipher, sends trusted servants on missions disguised as trade errands, and listens in silence as Baldwin's men plot over cups of ale. Her rebellion is quiet, patient, relentless like snow accumulating on rooftops, unnoticed until the weight is enough to bring them crashing down. Outside, the wolves come closer each night, their howls echoing through the cold air, reminders of a different kind of danger waiting beyond the manor walls. Here inside, the real predators sit at the high table wrapped in furs, their smiles sharp as blades. Eleanor knows them well now. She knows their habits, their weaknesses, their ambitions. She has become something they do not expect a woman who refuses to vanish, who refuses to play her assigned role quietly. Her wedding was never about love or partnership. It was about control, and she has learned to take it back in the only way available to her, through endurance, through patience, through the careful art of being underestimated. As you listen now, perhaps wrapped in your own quiet darkness, imagine the cold stone halls of Northmere, the candlelight flickering against ancient walls. The silent calculations of a woman who refuses to become history's footnote. Medieval weddings were not the end of danger, they were the beginning of decades-long battles fought without swords, in the spaces where power hides. Stay with me, because this story of quiet rebellion is not finished. Yet Part 18. The snows of midwinter settle heavier around Northmere as the nights grow longer and the days shrink into brief hours of grey light, the manor creaking beneath the cold like an old ship caught in frozen seas. Yet inside, Eleanor's war continues, not the kind with banners and cavalry, but the silent bone-deep war of political survival that began the moment her wedding vows were spoken. The guests from the midwinter feast have gone back to their case-states, leaving behind rumors in their wake like muddy footprints on rush-covered floors. Baldwin's name is now spoken openly as the likely next lord of Northmere, and Godfrey's fate seems sealed, a declaration of incompetence from the bishop's court, followed by a quiet retirement to a distant abbey, or if he is unlucky, a death in bed that no one will question too closely. Eleanor listens to these whispers as she moves through the manor, her face serene, her words soft, but her mind sharpened like a blade honed over months of tension. She has mapped every alliance in the house, every debt owed, every secret held. The clergy, the knights, the merchants, and the peasants who serve them all. She knows who is paid by Baldwin, who pretends neutrality, and who is afraid enough to be useful. This is no longer a household, it is a battlefield where the weapons are silence, rumors, parchment, and patience. The bishop's verdict has not yet arrived, and this delay is its own form of torment. Each day Eleanor checks for messengers, their horses steaming in the cold as they arrive at the manor gate. Their letters sealed in wax she now dreads and craves in equal measure. She knows the game being played. Baldwin has bribed church officials to speed the annulment, but Eleanor has planted her own counterweights in the chancery, ensuring that every document Baldwin sends is met with a query, a delay, a challenge to procedure. In medieval law, time is a weapon, and she wields it ruthlessly, knowing that the longer the court delays, the more exhausted Baldwin's supporters become, the more uncertain his allies grow, the more chance she has to reshape the playing field. Piled beneath their feet. Godfrey, meanwhile, has retreated almost entirely from public life. He does not speak to Baldwin. He rarely speaks to Eleanor. His once pale face is now thin and waxen, his eyes shadowed by illness and resignation. Sometimes he asks her, late at night, what will happen after he is gone. Eleanor does not answer directly, because in truth she does not know not yet. But she whispers to him softly, brushing his hair back, telling him stories of other lords, who vanished quietly into abbeys, their names forgotten while their estates crumbled into dust. It is not comfort, but it is a kind of truth, and in this cold season of their marriage, truth is the only kindness left. Eleanor continues her work, hid in secret. She meets quietly with the manor steward, securing inventories of food and coin that Baldwin's men have overlooked. She forges new alliances with the merchants who control the winter supply lines, offering promises of favorable trade in spring if they delay Baldwin's shipments just long enough to make his supporters uneasy. She writes letters in cipher, sending them south with trusted messengers disguised as wool traders, carrying warnings to her father's house and to her cousin Margaret, who is now positioned in the court of a minor baron with influence over the chancery scribes. These letters are not pleas for rescue, they are instructions, precise and sharp, designed to keep Baldwin's ambitions tangled in paperwork and rumor while Eleanor continues to build her network of quiet resistance. This is not rebellion in the way history will record it. It is the softer, slower rebellion of a woman refusing to disappear, forcing her name to remain relevant in a system designed to forget her as soon as her womb proves politically inconvenient. Winter presses harder against the estate. The peasants in the villages burn damp wood in hearths that smoke rather than warm. Hunger creeps into the corners of every cottage. In the manor, the servants grow thinner, their cheeks hollow, their movements slower. Eleanor orders careful distribution of food, not enough to ease their suffering entirely, but enough to keep them loyal to her rather than Baldwin. She knows that in times of famine, alliances are forged not by blood but by bread, and she ensures that her kitchen staff remembers who feeds them. She also keeps a careful eye on the manor guards, noting who accepts Baldwin's extra coin and who looks to her for instructions when no one else is watching. Medieval power is not static. It shifts like snowdrifts in wind, and Eleanor has learned to move with it, adjusting her plans daily, sometimes hourly. As the cold squeezes tighter, her body remains central to the game. The question of an heir still floats unanswered, and she allows it to remain that way, knowing that certainty would end her control over the narrative. Some days she feels the weight of possibility beneath her ribs, a delayed course, a flutter. In her stomach, but she does not ask the midwife for confirmation. She prefers not to know, not yet. A confirmed pregnancy would lock her into a new chapter of the game, one she cannot yet afford to play. So she lets the rumors swirl. She lets Baldwin believe she might still produce an heir, forcing him to hesitate just enough to keep his plans from solidifying fully. Uncertainty is her strongest weapon now, and she wields it without mercy. The winter feasts pass, cold and hollow. There are no grand celebrations this year, only quiet meals in the great hall, with fewer candles lit than usual to save on wax. Eleanor presides over these dinners with a calm face, listening to Baldwin boast about the tournament he still plans to hold in spring, watching the knights who shift in their seats, uncertain whether to pledge their swords to him yet or to wait, care, and see how the bishop's verdict unfolds. She watches for cracks in Baldwin's alliances, for moments of overconfidence that she can exploit later. She smiles when necessary, but behind her eyes she counts debts and memorizes every conversation like a ledger written in her mind. On the coldest night of the season, a messenger finally arrives, a thin man on a lathered horse, carrying a sealed document from the bishop's court. Eleanor receives the letter in private, her hands steady as she breaks the seal. The parchment is crisp, the ink sharp and fresh, but the words inside are exactly as she expected. The bishop has not yet made a decision. The annulment remains pending. Baldwin's petition has been received, but not finalized. There are questions about dowry terms, about the legality of the initial marriage vows, about the health of the groom, all of which require further investigation. Eleanor smiles slightly, folding the parchment with careful precision, knowing that this delay is not an accident but the result of her months of work. She has bought herself more time, perhaps weeks, perhaps longer. In medieval politics, time is the only currency that matters when armies are not yet marching, and she has just purchased another handful of days to maneuver. She does not share the contents of the letter with Baldwin immediately. Instead, she lets him stew in uncertainty, lets him wonder why no news has come. She continues to meet with the household knights, with the servants, with the clerics who handle the manor's spiritual obligations. She offers small gestures of power, a coin here, a favor there, a promise of future reward if loyalty is shown now. These are not grand moves, but they are effective. In a world held together by oaths and obligations, even a slight shift in allegiance can topple a carefully built political structure. Eleanor knows this, and she plays the game with the steady patience of a woman who has nothing left to lose, except herself. Godfrey's health declines further, and Eleanor stays by his side more often now, not out of love, but out of necessity. His body is frail, his mind sometimes sharp, sometimes lost in fevered dreams. He speaks of their wedding sometimes, recalling the feast, the banners, the songs. He remembers the moment they stood before the priest, hands clasped, repeating words neither of them fully understood at the time. He asks if it mattered, any of it meant anything beyond this cold bed and these political machinations. Eleanor tells him softly that it did, because it brought her here, to this moment where she is still standing, still fighting, still holding the threads of power that no one thought she would dare touch. Her marriage may have been a trap, but she has used it to build her own quiet kingdom, one not yet visible on maps, but real nonetheless. As you listen now, perhaps letting your breath slow, imagine the snow falling outside Northmere, covering the footprints of spies and servants, blanketing the roofs of the manor where secrets gather like frost in the corners of the windows. Imagine Eleanor standing in her chamber, the parchment from the bishop folded in her hand, the soft crackle of the fire behind her as she prepares for the next day's work. There is no rest in this world, not for women like her, not for those caught in the aftermath of dangerous marriages, but there is endurance, and sometimes that is enough. Stay with me, because the last chapters of this quiet war are still waiting to be told. Part 19. As the new year begins in the frozen manor of Northmere, the snow thickens into drifts against doors, sealing the household in a kind of icy prison where breath fogs in the halls and silence becomes a second skin. Eleanor no longer measures time by the church bells or the phases of the moon, but by the quiet moves of political survival, a glance exchanged in the corridor, a piece of bread slipped to a servant in news exchange, a new name whispered to her by a maid who overheard Baldwin plotting near the stables. Her wedding, now a distant memory to those who toasted her months ago, has become a ghost eventa ceremony that was never meant to be the end of anything, but rather the beginning of a long and dangerous entanglement, a binding of flesh, land, and duty from which she cannot escape. Yet escape is not what she seeks anymore. She seeks control, and control, she has learned, is a matter of inches, not miles. Control is knowing who brings the messages from the bishop, who sharpens the knives in the kitchen, who tends the chapel candles, and overhears the sins confessed late at night when lords think no one is listening. These small points of leverage are more powerful than armies, because armies require banners and swords, but rumors only require breath. Godfrey fades daily, and his absence from the political chessboard is both a gift and a curse. Without him, Baldwin grows bolder, but so that to do his mistakes. He has started to act as though he already holds the title of Lord, issuing orders in Godfrey's name without waiting for approval, rearranging the manor staff to suit his allies. Eleanor watches all of this, her face calm, her words measured, but inside she is marking each overreach, each moment when Baldwin pushes too far. In the medieval world, hubris is often the first step toward downfall, and Eleanor is patient enough to let Baldwin tie his noose, maintains her network of informants carefully, feeding just enough information back to her father's clerks and to her cousin Margaret in London to ensure that her allies remain alert. Letters travel slowly in winter, but they travel nonetheless. And each one Eleanor sends is another thread woven into her quiet net of survival. The bishop's court remains silent for weeks, and this delay unsettles Baldwin more than any outright denial would have. She expected swift action, a clean annulment, a quick installation of his authority as Lord of Northmere. Instead, he is forced to wait, to explain to his supporters why no decision has been made, to soothe the restless knights who wonder if aligning with him was a mistake. Eleanor encourages this unease subtly, arranging for minor disputes in the villages to be brought directly to Baldwin's attention, forcing him to mediate between angry peasants and desperate bailiffs. These tasks are tedious, but more importantly, they expose Baldwin's weaknesses. He has no patience for the daily grind of lordship, no talent for calming unrest without resorting to threats. And the more he mishandles these petty issues, the more his reputation frays. In the medieval mind, a lord must appear in control at all times, and Baldwin's growing frustration becomes a crack in his armor. Inside the manor, life slows to a crawl under the weight of winter. Fires are kept burning day and night, but the cold still seeps into the stones. The servants' faces are hollow with hunger, their hands red and cracked from frostbite. But they continued their duties because to refuse would be worse. Eleanor ensures that those loyal to her receive extra portions quietly, wrapped in cloth and passed beneath tables, because loyalty bought with kindness lasts longer than loyalty bought with fear. She listens carefully to the household gossip, noting who still speaks of Godfrey as Lord, who shifts their allegiance with each passing day. Even the smallest shifts matter now, because the manor is poised at the edge of a knife-one decision from the bishop. One sudden death, one act of defiance, could tip everything into chaos. That Eleanor meets privately with the chaplain, a nervous man who sweats even in the cold. He confesses to her that Baldwin has pressured him to alter the household records, to prepare new documents naming Baldwin as acting lord in anticipation of the bishop's ruling. Eleanor nods quietly, placing a hand on the chaplain's arm, reminding him of the confessions she has heard over the past month, sins whispered in the dark, names spoken in confidence that she has not yet revealed. The chaplain understands immediately. His pen will not move unless she allows it. In a world where parchment carries more power than the sword, Controlling the scribes is the same as controlling history, and Eleanor has no intention of letting Baldwin write the ending of this story unopposed. Godfrey, in his private chamber, becomes less a husband and more a symbol figure, fading from the living world into legend, even while he still breathes. He calls for Eleanor less often now, his voice weak, his hands cold even under heavy furs. Sometimes he mutters prayers, sometimes he speaks of hunting trips from his youth, of days when he still believed he would be a lord in truth, not in name only. Eleanor sits with him in these moments, knowing that her role is not to comfort, but to witness. She does not cry because in the medieval world, tears are currency easily spent and rarely replenished, and she needs all her strength for what is coming. She lets Godfrey drift into sleep, then returns to her quiet work, organizing the manor accounts, reviewing land records, planning for the coming spring when the snow will melt and the political thaw will bring new dangers. Baldwin sends new messengers to the bishop, growing impatient, pressing for resolution. Eleanor allows these efforts to proceed unchallenged, knowing that the bishop's court is already tangled in the delays she and her allies have arranged. She receives reports from London. Her cousin Margaret confirms that several clerks in the chancery have been persuaded, some with coin, others with favors, to question the legality of Baldwin's claims. There are whispers that the church is reconsidering its role in Northmere's succession, wary of setting a precedent that could unravel other noble marriages across the realm. Marriage, after all, is not just a union of people, it is the glue that holds property, lineage, and power together, and to annul one marriage carelessly is to invite chaos into dozens of others. As the days crawl toward spring, Eleanor prepares for every possibility. She has arranged for safe passage south if she must flee, with routes mapped through abbeys and villages where her family's allies still hold sway. She has secured promises from merchants who control the trade routes, ensuring that Baldwin's supplies will falter if he tries to press too hard against her. But, more than that, she has prepared for the possibility of staying not as a wife, not as a widow, but as a political entity in her own right. A woman who controls the manor not through official title but through the invisible web of influence she has spun. She knows that even if Baldwin becomes lord in name, he will not truly rule unless she allows it. The servants follow her. The scribes write what she tells them. The peasants in the villages look to her for fairness, not to Baldwin, and in the medieval world this quiet authority often outweighs the official kind. On the last day of February, as the snow begins to soften at the edges of the fields, Eleanor walks the manor grounds alone. The sky is gray, the air sharp in her lungs, but beneath the cold she feels the stirrings of the next phase of the game. Her wedding may have started this journey, but it will not define its ending. She understands now that marriage, in her world, is not about partnership or love, it is about survival. About maneuvering through a labyrinth designed to trap women into silence. But she has refused that silence. She has played the long game, planting seeds of resistance in every corner of the estate, in the minds of servants, in the scrolls of scribes, in the promises whispered to merchants and clerics alike. As you listen now, perhaps breathing softly, letting the quiet of this story wrap around you like the cold air of Northmere's winter. Imagine Eleanor standing at the edge of the manor's wall, looking out over snow-covered fields that have seen centuries of quiet political wars like this one. Her dress is heavy, her hands are cold, but her eyes are sharp. She has survived the wedding, the feast, the threats, the waiting, and she is still here, still standing. Medieval weddings did not end with the vows, they began lifetimes of quiet, conflict, and the story of this marriage, like the snow beneath her feet, is far from finished. Stay with me, because the final chapter of this hidden history is about to unfold. The last snows melt slowly at Northmere, revealing beneath the frost the scars of a long hidden war that no chronicler will ever fully record. Mud replaces ice in the manor courtyard, the streams swell with runoff, and the crows return to the leafless trees, calling in harsh voices that sound, to Eleanor's ears, like warnings rather than spring greetings. Inside the manor walls, however, the temperature has not risen. The cold that lingers in the halls is not from weather but from the tightening of political tensions that began with her wedding and have not loosened since. Her marriage, once described in public letters as a joyous alliance, has in reality been a slow siege, not of stone towers but of human endurance, of quiet calculations, of whispered threats passed between servants in the kitchen and scribes in the chapel. Now, as the frost recedes, the final moves of the game approach, and Eleanor prepares herself not for peace but for the most dangerous phase of all, the aftermath. When winners and survivors are not always the same, the bishop's courier arrives. On a damp morning, his horse spattered with mud, his face gray from sleepless travel. The letter he carries is sealed with the bishop's mark, heavy wax pressed deep with ecclesiastical authority.